Hey family, it's your co-host Yogi Rich, introducing episode 3 of OneAnswer Yoga. This episode is all about Radha's story, her very unique upbringing under the direct influence of Swami Satchidananda, one of the state's most preeminent yogi masters. Although she lived in that system, she offers a complex and beautiful view of growing up with her family and her peers and how her life turned out. It's a really, really riveting story. Later on, we switch into how we met, our story, and what brings us together, and really why we're launching this podcast. Sort of the inspiration behind it, and what we hope that our audience gains from listening to us speak for a couple of hours every now and then. This podcast is about life. It's about the complexities of life. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce episode 3. One love. Peace.
All right, we're back. We had to take a little break. Sorry. As you can see, I had to put my glasses on, was doing a little reading. Every once in a while, you just got to take a break when you're doing a podcast.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's like sometimes it's not always planned, but it's always appreciated. But where were we? What were we talking about? I forgot.
I don't know. We were
Well,
talking about, I think we were just, you know what? I'm going to guess we were talking about yoga.
I think that's a safe assumption. What do you want to talk about your life? Like, a little bit about your.
Uh, yeah, we can start back up with that. So, okay. So my story probably starts with my parents. My parents were both doing yoga before I was born. So, mom grew up in like the Midwest. She really loved all things religious, although, later on in her life, sort of resonated more with spiritual things. But she always like loved to go to like church camp and go to church and do all these things like that. So mom has always really been into some kind of spiritual pursuit. And for most of her younger life, that looked like, traditional Christian
Yeah.
background. Mom was raised by her father passed away when she was 16, and that had a huge impact on her life, I think. And then her mother and father divorced when she was quite young. So she grew up with a divorced parents and a broken household when that was not really that much of a thing. And her mom was incredibly like independent, um, just an amazing woman. Really, I mean, I never really got to know her, but like everything I know about her, she was just really so far ahead of her time and really just incredible. So I say this because my parents came from some pretty cool people themselves. So then my dad was raised actually all over the place. My grandfather, Charlie Metro, was in professional baseball, and he has also a cool story, which I'll tell at some point a little bit more because I think it's really just fascinating the immigrant experience that people have. So he was actually Ukrainian. His parents both came over from the Ukraine, met here in the U.S. and got married, and he was their first child.
Wow.
They were based out of Pennsylvania. He worked in the coal mines. My great-grandfather was a coal miner. And my grandfather got out of work in the coal mines by going into baseball and then went into professional baseball and was winning professional baseball for decades and decades and decades and decades. He was a manager, a coach. All you baseball fans out there, I promise you I'll tell you more stories about that later. So my dad was raised all over the place. He traveled a lot when he was growing up. Finally, they settled in Colorado. It is so fun that actually Quentin is living in Denver now because that's actually where I was born, although I have not lived in Denver since I was about 6. Wow. So it's really cool that he's like, you're in the source of where like my story starts. So we lived in Denver. My grandparents had a little horse ranch there, and my parents already had 3 children. So I have 3 older sisters. Around the time that my second sister was sort of conceived and being born, my dad went to Ecuador, and he was gold mining in Ecuador. And that became like a really, I think, transformational time in his life because he started seeing life really differently.
Mm.
I don't know for sure if he was doing drugs while he was down there, but I would imagine during that time period, my parents probably smoked a lot of marijuana and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was sort of influencing his perspective as well. Um, so my parents, started sort of like dropping out of like society. And of course, this is like late 60s.
Mm.
They're really in an exploration mode. They're seeing that like their traditional lives were a little bit small for them and what they wanted to create in their world. So they start exploring um, other opportunities. My dad was actually a cowboy in his early years, also. Like,
I can see
so he
that.
literally, I'm not exaggerating, like, literally, he rode on the range on a horse and, was herding cattle.
Free. Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
So he then, so then he went and he was working in animal husbandry. That's what he went to school for.
Mm.
And while he was working in animal husbandry, he was working for some sort of company that made maybe green for animals and for like cows and stuff. And so Guy was working there I hope I'm getting this story right, Dad. Sorry, he's probably going to correct me when he listens to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he met this wonderful individual named Gary, and Gary ended up being really influential in my life too as I was growing up. But he met Gary, and Gary introduced him through a series of conversations. They were work buddies, and they'd ride to and from work together. And he started talking to him about meditation. And that was really my dad's first exposure, really, to like this idea of meditation, yoga in a really more, intimate way rather than just like, seeing a poster maybe out in Berkeley or something like that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, so then my parents really started getting into this idea of yoga and meditation, and then they were kind of exploring. They ended up with Eknath Ishwaran, and they were meditating with him, and they actually tried to join his organization and wanted to become initiated
Wow.
under him, and he actually told them no. I'm not your guru. I'm not your teacher.
Huh.
My parents were like, "Wait, what? Are you allowed to say that?"
I'm ugly? Like, come on now.
Wow.
Like, damn. Hey. That's good though.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So then they were like, "Okay, well, what do we do?" Then they started getting involved with the Radha Krishna movement and the Radha Krishna temple,
Mm.
which is why I got named Radha. And so when I was born, they were kind of doing that. They were still meditating. That we were going to the Unitarian Church. So my parents were really just searching for something more. And of course, they had kids. So I'm their fourth child.
Mm.
And they're really trying to figure out, like, how do we raise our children in a different way? So 1972 comes along. I'm born. They're still trying to do all this searching. But from my perspective, I wasn't hanging around on this planet very long without reconnecting with my teacher and guru.
Yeah.
So I always suspect that, that was part of it, is their children were very connected with Swami Satchidananda. And so we were like, okay, Mom and Dad, get on it. Like,
Yeah. Hurry up.
yeah, get to the point. We gotta be connected with our guru. So then my dad went and saw Swami Satchidananda speak
Mm-hmm.
in somewhere in early 1973 maybe, and came back and told my mom, like, wow, that was amazing. You have to come see him talk. That was just incredible. That really changed my life. So my mom came back and I guess got to hear him, and then they brought the kids to be introduced to him, the kids being me and my three older sisters. And pretty much from the second he laid eyes on us, he told my parents, like, these are my children. Like, you can take care of them. Like, you'll get to take care of them, but no, these are my kids. So let's just get that straight.
Did he have any kids?
He actually did have children. Yeah,
Mm.
we can talk a little bit about in
Yeah,
another
okay.
episode. We should like kind of go through his life story because I think it's kind of interesting,
Okay.
and also very interesting why I think he is like just like the coolest guru because of his mixed experience of being a householder and then being a swami,
Yeah.
which is so cool, right? Like a lot of times you don't have that mix, especially in the early days in India. But I think that was part of the reason why he resonated really well with my parents is because my parents were very much householders. Like you meet so many people in this yoga world who are like, we want to renounce everything. We want to go live in a cave in India.
Yeah.
But my parents were householders and they enjoyed the householder life. Um, my
So
dad,
for those
yeah.
listening though, householder I realize is more of like what does householder mean exactly? It was a little bit more context to householder.
So householder means like you have renunciates, people who renounce the world, and that could be like your swamis, your priests,
Mm.
your monks, like all the people who are like, no, we're renouncing the world and living a spiritual life. And then householders are the people who are like, no, we're going to embrace and be part of the world, but still live a spiritual life.
Yes.
Um, so my parents, because they had children and because they were like obviously working jobs and being in the world, they didn't get to renounce the world and become swamis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although in integral yoga and in that order, there are plenty of swamis in the order.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we had a little bit of a break, um, partially because of my voice. So that's going to be part of the rest of the story of mine. But I think we left off, if I'm correct, with my parents were meeting Swami Satchidananda for the first time.
Mhm.
So this was like 1973, and my father had just gone to see Swami Satchidananda. So my mom went, and then, of course, naturally, they wanted to bring their kids to meet Swami Satchidananda. So they brought I think that's what we were talking about. So they had brought all six children. No, there were five of us at the time, five children or four children. I don't know. I've lost a child somewhere, Quentin. Um, they brought us to meet Swami Satchidananda, and immediately the first thing he said to them was, "These are not your children; these are my children." And of course, if you look at it in the big yogic context, we believe in reincarnation, and we believe in this idea that you are drawn to people lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. So my parents immediately were just like, "Oh wow!" Like clearly, this is not just our teacher. This was someone that our children also brought us to, and so that was why he became the guru of the entire family. So we lived out in Colorado uh, until I was about 5. We lived on my grandparents' ranch, which was pretty awesome. They had a horse ranch out there. And so off and on, we'd live in this little bunkhouse. It was literally a remodeled barn.
Mm.
Um, and we had, we were just talking about it last night. We had this room where there were 2 sets of bunk beds in the room. And then there was just enough room in between the bunk beds where there was a baby bed. So when my brother was born, it was like 5 kids in this teeny tiny room. And you could basically like barely walk around the bunk beds. And my grandmother raised boxers. So we had this boxer dog too. His name was Bowser. And Bowser, because I was the littlest at the time, he used to be able to come in and he'd crawl up into my bed and he'd wiggle himself up against the wall and then push on me and push me out of the bed. And so I'd go crying to my parents, like, Bowser kicked me out of the bed again, Mom. Which is not unlike what it feels like these days with Henson. So
He's their
Henson
bad.
is my service dog, who I think I mentioned, but you guys will get to meet Henson, I'm sure. Um, so then, as their kids were starting to get school age, my parents really wanted their children to go to a more yogic school. And Swami Satchidananda at that point had opened up the Integral Yoga School in Connecticut. So my parents decided they were going to pick up their whole life, move across country to Connecticut, to the ashram in Connecticut. And I think they had about $300 in their pocket. They
Quick
had a
question.
van. Yeah.
How old were
It's like,
you?
wait.
How old were you and your siblings during this Connecticut move?
So I was about ready to turn 7, so I was 6, which meant my next sister was 9, the one after that was 10, and the one after that would have been like 13.
Wow.
And these were all four girls. And my brother was a baby. So my brother was like two or something. Or so, uh, yeah. So we show up in Connecticut at the ashram, and apparently Gurudev, before we arrived, had been telling everybody that the marvelous metros were on the way, and he kept referring to us as the marvelous metros. So by the time we reached Connecticut, everybody was excited and ready for us to be there, and like, like, oh my gosh, this family's moving in. And of course, we had 5 kids, all who were going to enter into the school, which was huge because the school at the time was only maybe 10 kids. So all of a sudden now you're going to have, a quarter of the school, a third of the school is going to be made up of metros. So at that time, my dad had gotten a job working as a janitor for this prep school. So at the prep school, they provided us with housing. So there was this big house that we could live at while we were on the property. However, the house, when we moved out there, wasn't ready yet. So we had to move into one of the old abandoned dorms. And this is an important story because my mother is such an amazing person. Like, she is such a champ. Here she is with 5 kids moving across the country to a community in a place she doesn't really even know. And her house is not ready. So they move her into like this old abandoned dormitory. And all she has is a crock pot to cook out of for all of us. And then we just have like mats that we roll out on the tile floors or concrete floors or whatever that's in this dormitory. And she was so fun. Like, she made it such a fun experience for us. It was like an adventure. We all just thought we were having this crazy fun adventure where we were like roller skating up and down the hallways of this old dormitory and running around through the different rooms and checking it out and like exploring the property. And my mother, we now call her Fun Nana because my mother makes everything fun. Like, there's nothing that she cannot turn into some sort of fun, positive, exciting experience. Which is really key because my parents put us through a lot of interesting adventures in our life. But we really like growing up, like, we really could see them now as adventures because my mother was always making everything such a fun experience.
Oh, I see.
So here we are. We end up in Connecticut at the school. So I'm just entering first grade. So I go into the school, and it was a very experimental school at the time. They were kind of taking some like Montessori ideas, some Waldorf ideas, and then mixing it in with these yogic principles. So we would meditate. We do hatha yoga every day. We cooked our own food. It was always like the same meal. I ate basically the same meal for 12 years.
Wow. What was it?
Slight variations. So in the beginning, the first probably the first like 6 years was brown rice, steamed tofu, and steamed broccoli. That's it. Day after day after day after day. Still my favorite meal on the planet.
Wow.
Dee will tell you that's my comfort food when...
Tahini, anything on top? Like any...
No, sometimes they had some tamari.
Okay.
We could have some tamari on our food, and then later on, I think they added a little ghee. But when we got into high school, we didn't have enough money, like junior high school. They didn't really have enough money to even feed us. So instead we went to brown rice, boiled cabbage, and lentils. And that's what we ate every day. Also now one of my favorite meals. I could eat that all the time. I know, it's so funny how comfort food
You're not selling it that well, but I love it.
It was so good. I mean, still to this day. And then we had nutritional yeast, of course, because as vegetarians, you're always concerned about getting enough B vitamins. That's the one thing that as a vegetarian or vegan can be really challenging to source from vegan and vegetarian sources. And now you have to understand also, back then, you couldn't just go to the store and buy tofu. Like, there was no vegan products. I mean, if you went to a store and found yogurt, that was amazing. So having access to all this food. And then my mom, she joined like food co-ops, and she made almost all of our food from scratch because there wasn't really, you just couldn't go to the store and just buy stuff. Like, it just didn't exist back then. So I was really fortunate that, like, particularly my nutrition when I was young was really extraordinary. We didn't eat a lot of sugar. Like, we didn't, we had carob. I still don't. That's one thing.
What? You had what?
Carob.
What's that? That doesn't even sound edible. That sounds like That sounds like an animal. What is that?
Carob is this like it's like a plant-based thing that they use to like replace chocolate, but it really doesn't taste like chocolate. So nobody's being tricked by carob.
But yeah, that's probably why I never heard of it.
And it's sort of
Uh,
like it gets really dry. And
mm,
so it's like this sort of like dry, chocolatey sort of, but not chocolatey sort of thing. They don't really use it a lot anymore. I think partially because everybody realized there's better alternatives now.
yeah.
But back in the day,
Hmm.
growing
That
up,
was.
carob was a thing. So all of your quote unquote chocolate was carob.
Mm,
One of our absolute favorite treats ever, still to this day, this one I do love, is apple cider vinegar and honey popsicles. That would be like the kid
okay.
treat. Like we'd go over to our friends' houses and that's what we'd have is like popsicles. And it's really funny because like I have a group in Facebook of like a bunch of kids I grew up with at Yogaville and Integral Yoga.
Mm.
And every once in a while we'll put like some food thing in there. And that's one where everybody's like, oh yeah, those were good. And I fed them to my husband one time and he was like, honey, this is not a treat. This is not
What about fruit? Were there any fruit around? What was your
I mean,
relationship?
they would have us eat fruit some, and like obviously, like when we ate at home, we had other vegetables and fruits,
Gotcha.
and for breakfast and everything like that. But even fruit, like they were so conscientious about the way we ate.
Mm,
Swami Satchidananda was really all about holistic living and really making sure that like food is medicine.
yeah.
So the way that they kind of crafted what we ate as children was very important. And
Mm,
again, this was really experimental. They were seeing like what happens when you raise Western children in this ashram environment? What
absolutely.
happens when you raise them in an American culture but feed them like very specific foods?
Right.
And I think it was part of a greater hippie movement, but definitely maybe a little bit more specific too, because every little bit of our education was overseen by Swami Satchidananda. He would check in with the teachers
Mm,
weekly, if not daily, be like, what did the kids learn? How is this kid doing? How are they adjusting? What are they,
mm.
because there were not that many of us. So he really could have a very hands on experience with how the kids were developing, what they were learning. So that
So
was pretty crazy. I mean, to
I,
have
I
like,
I have a question too.
yeah,
So it's a kind of a multifaceted question. So it's like, okay, so Swami Satchidananda, of course, is wise in many directions, but I don't know like his experience with like being a principal type of thing. So did he, when he was like deciding like how to mix the different aspects, was it based off of primarily his experience? Were there any like advisors or friends, or any other like examples that he went off of? Um,
yeah. So
yeah.
both Quentin. So he also, first of all, he was a parent. He
Yeah.
had children himself.
Mm,
In another episode, we'll go into his life story a little bit
yeah.
more because it's really fascinating. And I think really, again, speaks to why I think he's such an extraordinary teacher and very unique in many ways.
Mm,
And then also, he worked in many schools and gurukulas and raised like orphanages. He worked in orphanages and raised children in
mm,
India when
mm,
he was going through after his wife was gone and he left his children and he went to go like work in these orphanages to raise children. So he
mm,
had a lot of experience with children. But
mm,
also we did have Swami Sarvananda who had a PhD
mm,
in education, and she was actually the principal of the school.
mm,
And then we had multiple teachers who also had, Montessori experience or Waldorf experience or, experience in teaching like in these different methods and modalities. As we grew up, our teachers tended to be people with PhDs because those were the ones who were around and
yeah.
had teaching experience. So like by the time I was like 13, like we had one teacher who had a PhD in anthropology and she was like an anthropology professor. So at like 12 or
Mm.
13, we're like learning anthropology, which is not something you usually
Yeah,
get.
what a blessing. That's so awesome. Yeah.
It was really cool. And like, our English teacher, she was also a college professor. So like she was teaching us English, not from like she
Mm,
wasn't looking at us like 12 and
esoteric.
13-year-olds. She was
Yeah.
like, well, I know how to teach college English. So I'm going to adapt it a little for you guys. But like basically this is what you're going to get because this is what I know. So, so in Connecticut,
Mm,
uh, Yeah, we had just like this really incredible school experience where um, we were free to sort of run around this incredible property, this ashram in Connecticut. Uh, we interacted a lot with Swami Satchidananda. He'd stop by the school, and when he was in town, and he'd just stop by and see us. And everybody kind of just like looked out for us. And we really did have a lot of freedom there. And it was, again, very early days of the structure of ashram living.
Yeah.
Um, but then they decided that Swami Satchidananda wanted to build this lotus temple.
Yeah.
And this temple was going to be in the shape of a lotus flower. And it was dedicated to bringing peace through world religions.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we didn't have room up there or there was some sort of zoning issues with building it there. So they were looking for alternate properties.
Yeah.
We were looking at some really cool properties, Quentin. And
Yeah.
to this day, maybe I have a little bit of a grudge that we ended up in Virginia. I'm like, why couldn't we have been the ones in the Bahamas?
Yeah, I feel
But
that. Yeah.
we were looking in California and, the Bahamas and all kinds of places we were looking. But we found, Swami Satchidananda found this beautiful property
Yeah.
along the James River in Virginia. And it is a beautiful property.
It
And
is.
it is a beautiful place. Um, so they decided that they were going to come and move the entire ashram down here from Connecticut.
Yeah.
Um, Swami Satchidananda had always attracted to him many like famous people, or he was kind of like the hip, cool like guru at the time
Yeah.
in the 60s. And so one of the people who was one of his students at the time was Carole King. And Carole King had this beautiful property up in Connecticut, in New Canaan. If you've heard that song "Been to Canaan," and I want to go back again. She actually wrote that about this beautiful property in
Wow.
Connecticut.
Hmm.
And so she had donated the property to Swami Satchidananda. And we used to go up there for summer camp when we were in Connecticut as kids. And
Yeah.
then they decided that they would sell this property and buy the property in Virginia. So she was actually the one who helped us buy the property in Virginia, which is interesting
Yeah.
because when we went and bought the property in New York in 1970, it was actually Alice Coltrane who
Hmm.
did a concert in Carnegie Hall, and they're celebrating all that this year, which is really cool. But Alice Coltrane was the one who helped us get the money to buy the property in New York.
Wow.
So both of these properties have this like really female musical background, right? Of like these incredible women who made these extraordinary properties happen, which I think
Makes
is,
sense to me.
yeah, you kind of feel it, right? In the energy and just the space in general. Oh, that's Henson. Hold on. He's got something to say.
What's up, Henson?
Yeah, what's up, Henson? Um,
He said,
so
hmm.
so we have only been up in Connecticut. I think we were there for maybe a couple weeks or something like that. And we go to the satsang and Swami Satchidananda says we're gonna move. And my mom was just like, wait, what? I just moved all the way across the country and now you're gonna move us again.
Yes.
It was actually 2 years. We were in Connecticut for about 2 years before we headed off to Virginia.
Hmm.
So then the school ended up closing down in Connecticut. Um, and the school ended up moving to Virginia. And
Hmm.
this experiment of this school was really extraordinary in the individuals it produced. And of course, at the time, we didn't really understand maybe what we were doing. And I think that they had some idea, but I don't think even they appreciated the kind of people they were going to be producing from the school. I think Swami Satchidananda probably had a pretty good idea. So there's all these incredible, incredible individuals who came out of this school for such a teeny tiny little school
Hmm.
to have this many people that were like attached to the school. So like when I was in Connecticut, I went to school with Rivers Cuomo from Weezer. Liev Schreiber, the actor, went to school with me in Connecticut.
Hmm.
Remington Donovan went to school with me in Connecticut. He is now a big author and does numerology. I'm hoping we'll have him here on the podcast one day.
Yeah.
Then when we went to Connecticut, when we came to Virginia, Stefan Lassard from Dave Matthews Band went to school with me. Gabe Klein, who was a city planner and worked with Rahm Emanuel both in Chicago and DC, and Barack Obama in planning out both DC and Chicago, went to school with me. Atman Binstock went to school with me in Connecticut. He was one of the chief architects of Oculus. Just all of these. And then Travis Archer went to school with me, and he's like a big, huge game designer at like Disney, I think. And so all of these people, and that's not even just like those of us who are just excelling in our little fields. Like Asha Goodman is like this incredible producer, and now not a producer. She works in what do they call them when they
What do they make?
artist?
Manager?
Kind of like a manager, but not a manager. She's like the one who does all the advertising and promotion, I think.
Gotcha.
So Asha Goodman, like, I mean, I just went to school, and that's just a couple off the top of my head, but they were just really extraordinary. Like, my brother was in one of the top goth bands in the 90s. My sister is one of the architects of World Health. She works with YMCAs and Congress and the CDC and all these people on a daily basis. It just produced some really, really, really extraordinary people.
Any childhood pregnancies? I mean, any teenage pregnancies?
100%. Absolutely. We did. When we got to Virginia, one of our friends got pregnant. I think she was like 14, 15, something like that.
Yeah.
And that is another story.
I know.
That's kind of the challenging part, right? So basically in Connecticut, it was kind of ideal, and everybody was like, really, we were kind of running around and really free. When we came to Virginia, everything got much more structured. So the school here became more structured. And then as we started to become teenagers, I think they started to get a little nervous about what teenagers were going to do. And I think they were a little afraid we might turn out to be like them. Because a lot of our parents were super hippies, dropped out of society, did lots of drugs, all that stuff. So they came up with...
Interesting. That in and of itself is an interesting thought process. Which we can talk about later, but that's an interesting idea where it's like, here you are, a doctor or a Swami or whatever, and you're like, I don't want these people to turn out like me. Or I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Like them, right?
Yeah.
Like they were afraid that we were going to have the same tendencies because they gave their parents a lot of headaches. Many of them, some of them were estranged from their families because they chose to live this alternate lifestyle.
Yeah.
I mean, they kind of ran away and joined an ashram, right? That was a pretty easy thing.
It's a big deal.
And you got to think contextually. Yoga, nobody knew what yoga was back then. So for someone to go and like, I shouldn't say nobody, the majority of the culture did not know what yoga was.
Yeah.
And particularly like it was sort of big in the 60s, but then it kind of had like this lull in the 70s and 80s. And by the time you got to like mid 80s, no, like the people were not talking about yoga.
Yeah.
It just wasn't in the, common vocabulary. And so I think that they were just kind of afraid of what they were so protective of us, and we were such a part of like this incredible experiment. I know they probably would not refer to it as an experiment, but it felt pretty experimental to those of us who were raised in it. And so they decided that the way to protect us was going to be to have these rules that they were going to. So they came up with like these, they call them guidelines, but really honestly, at the end of the day, they felt a little bit like rules.
Yeah.
Particularly to a teenager.
Yeah, 100%.
So basically they said, okay, we're going to kind of monitor what you watch, what you listen to. So we weren't allowed to listen to rock music. We had to have our music kind of pre-approved. We weren't allowed to we couldn't watch certain movies or TV. And we all had to like sign these guidelines if we wanted to go to school there that said we were going to follow these guidelines in order to go to school. So at that time, a bunch of kids left because they were like, yeah, no, I'm a teenager. I'm not signing that saying I won't drink or date or, do all of these things.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like a big schism a little bit in like our school experience. And the kids we had grown up with, everybody kind of been tight going along the same path. And then we sort of had this like break where like some of them left and some stayed. So for those of us that stayed, kind of things went on the same. I mean, it was very restrictive, and there was definitely, the school was such an interesting experience, Quentin, because it had so many benefits, but also there was some weird stuff that happened.
Mm.
A little bit you got to take in consideration the time period. Like when my husband and I are talking about our school experience, like when he was in elementary school, they were still hitting him across the knuckles with
Yeah.
rulers.
Yeah.
So there was similar stuff like that that was happening in our school.
Right.
That looking back now would be like, yeah, you should not be doing that to kids. Like that's not appropriate.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, it was like, oh, I mean, when I was a kid, and you know, I'm just a few years younger than you, not too many. And when I was a kid, I was yeah, it was like if you didn't beat your kids, if you weren't beating kids, it was like, what's wrong with you? Like it was sort
Yeah.
of like even we grew up in that environment. At school it was a little bit different, but this is also like in that quasi space where it's like you guys are like it's not homeschooling, but if you live really close to the school and it's kind of like you're cooking your own meals or you know you're
Yeah.
like you're doing meditations and you're doing hatha yoga there in the mornings like that's essentially your house. So it sort of blends that line.
It
Um,
really was. And they had this idea that kids were not just kids. The kids were like advanced souls in these little unformed human beings.
mm,
So they never treated us like children per se. They always treated us like we were sort of like, because if you look at the yogic teachings, it always says like, the most blessed people are the ones who are born to yogic parents. And if you're born to yogic parents and then they live a yogic lifestyle, and then it adds on to that, like if you have the great benefit of, having a guru, then that's a great blessing. And all of these different things that qualify you as like a great advanced
mm,
yogic soul. We hit all of those kind of benchmarks that they talk about in the ancient yogic teachings.
yeah.
And so very much they would interact with us in that way. Like there was no sense of, so I say, people underestimate kids all the time when it comes to yoga. I don't believe in kids yoga at all. And
Yeah.
maybe it's just because of the way I was brought up. But I'm like, this thing where you sing and dance and like use little songs to do yoga, I'm like, what?
I got my black belt at 12. You know what I mean? So I'm like, what is this? Like, no, it's like these. Yeah, like no.
I'm like, no, kids can do yoga way better than you, and don't
Way better.
underestimate them and don't think that they can't.
Yeah.
So we were meditating. I remember, some of the kids were going to some pretty high meditative states
Mm,
when we were like 5, 6, 7,
yeah.
even.
Yeah.
And we would, every morning we would go to school and we would sit down and start our day with a circle and we would meditate and we would chant. And then we'd go and do our studies. And all of our studies were always kind of woven into both the teachings of yoga, particularly as it relates to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And then also, again, it was very experiential learning. So if you were interested in something, they try to weave it into everything you did. So like,
Mm,
um,
mm,
like when we did geometry in high school, they said, well, we're not just going to teach you geometry. You're going to go out and build a play set for the younger kids. So
mm.
everything was like very hands-on. And if you were interested in something, they would encourage you like to just pursue it as far as you wanted to pursue it.
Oh, I see.
So even as a kid, if you got interested in, like we had one kid who was really into car mechanics. Like that's all he wanted to do was be like a mechanic. And so by the time he was like 7 or 8, they were sending him over to the garage every day.
Mm,
And he was working on cars every day. Like
yeah.
they were just really, it was all about just kind of seeing what that child's sort of like dharma and their path was. And then it was just really encouraging the child in whatever that was, which was pretty darn extraordinary. And again, also, uh, on the flip side, many of us ended up with severe perfectionism syndrome, like
Mm.
severe need for being
What is
perfect.
that?
Because if you
How
were
would
not
you?
perfect,
Mm,
then first of all, there was no failing in school ever.
mm,
You just did over and over and over and over and over until you got it.
mm,
So you never had the opportunity to just be like, oh, I failed class. Okay, that's it. I'm done. Instead,
yeah.
it was like, no, you failed. Now you get to go and like learn it until you learn it. So there was always
Mm.
this feeling of like, oh my God, I better learn it because if I don't, then I'm gonna have to do this again
Yeah,
and again and
again,
again
again.
until I get it.
Mm.
And then also, they held us to this really high standard. They were like, you are spiritual beings, you know better. Like, and so
But what about
this,
Maya?
that was, I mean, Maya,
Or like that perception of the constituents of nature and their ever changingness.
again, remember, they're trying to raise a certain quality of human right now.
Yeah,
Like, this
yeah,
is the
only the best.
experiment. What happens if we take these children where we raise them in these yogic principles? It's similar to what they do in India, right? They do have gurukulas in India. But in India, you're taking like these young boys, you're raising them in this ashram environment, and then they're going to be temple priests or they're going to work in, this environment. But now you're taking Western children and you're raising them in a gurukula environment and you're trying to merge and marry these things. And sometimes it worked really well, and sometimes it really did not work well. And so we do have also a rather high incidence of people who were raised here who have mental health issues. And I have my own theories for that. Part of it is they had us doing really intense practices really young. And then when we grew up and we started experimenting or drinking or doing drugs or just smoking or whatever it was that we were doing,
Yeah.
I think it kind of short circuited our brains. Also, I think we were raised in like this set of standards and ways of being that when we kind of went out and started interacting with traditional Western culture,
Mm.
again, it just didn't compute. And so we just started like our brains started going crazy because of
Mm.
the inability to integrate all this in. This is all my opinion.
Yeah.
This is not like,
Yeah, yeah.
nobody's gone and done an, study on us and as an experiment. And I'm sure the adults see it much different than I see it. And I'm sure some of the kids I was raised with see it different. But for the most part, I think I do have a unique experience because I was the only person who went from first grade all the way through 12th grade.
Mm.
So I was in the school for 12 years from day one, like kind of,
Yeah.
all the way through. And so, yeah, it was really an extraordinary
Mm.
experience and gave me so many blessings and so many gifts. Um, but also some really strange stuff too, which I'm sure will come up many times in conversations because I do have this really weird kind of skewed
Can you say one more weird thing
perspective.
other than the slapping of the knuckles?
Like stuff that happened to us. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Give me one more.
um, so yeah, one of the things that happened to us was here we are, little vegetarian kids,
Mm.
but they were teaching us discipline and like overcoming your mind. And so, sometimes we'd get broccoli from the garden and it would have worms in it,
Mm.
or the rice would have, like maggots because it had just been sitting too long.
Yeah.
And if it was cooked into the food and the kids complained about it, they'd say, no, you have to eat it,
Hmm.
which was a real disconnect for us as kids. We were like, you told us we're not supposed to be eating animals. Like, we're all vegetarian kids, but now you're telling us we have to eat the worms. Are you kidding?
Mm.
But I understand what they were trying to do. They were trying to say, like, you got to overcome your mind. Your mind is telling you, no, I'm not going to eat that. But they were so disciplined and so strict with us in that way. Like, we always had to overcome whatever barriers or, whatever they felt like
Mm.
was holding us back. We were taught to just like, no, you have to overcome it. And again, sometimes it worked and sometimes it
Yeah.
wasn't great.
There's a have you ever read the book Mastery of Self by I think it's by I have the book around here somewhere, but it's in the Ruiz family, Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and it's in like the Four Agreements. It might be in the Four Agreements, but in a lot of the Toltec tradition, they call it the system of domestication. And I'm glad that we started with this like topic because our like our experiences really, yeah, until we're 18 are really what bond us together also. Like, you probably have a closer connection to people that have a similar childhood to you, in some way, shape, or form. And so the system of domestication, it's just interesting to see, like, okay, we, the rebels, the hippies, they were like, we need another system. We need to figure
Yeah.
out like what system's gonna work. And um, but the culture just basically they use a really cool example of the grandmother sitting with her grandson, and he doesn't want to eat something. And first she's like, you should really eat this. It's gonna make you strong. It's gonna make you like he eats to a certain point, and then he wants to stop because he feels like he's full or whatever. His authentic self is saying that. And but grandma sees this and she's like, well, I know that he should. If the grandma knows, in her knowledge bank is that, hey, if you eat this, then if you eat all your food, you'll grow up stronger, right? You want to eat
Yeah.
all your food. And then so first he tries like the carrot, and then eventually the boy is like, I still don't want to eat, like, that's okay, I'll wait till next time. And then she hits him with the stick and is like, that you're basically being a bad boy, like, just, this is not perfect. And and then so the grandmother does it out of love for the boy, and at the same time, like, the boy is like, okay, I love my grandmother, so I'm gonna go ahead and do this. But now the boy is 35, and he every meal that he gets a large pizza to himself, and he's like, well, I gotta finish it. And these habits
Yeah.
downturn, they snowball.
Yeah, they do.
What's so beautiful about your analogy, and I think like which will really dispel the misconception about the yoga community, is that like we've feeling holier than thou, and feeling that like you're literally like a chosen one, like type kind of thing, being taught like you're the chosen one. And then as soon as you get out into the real world and you're watching the towers come down, you're like, oh my goodness, like this
This
will be a
doesn't feel
life.
so chosen one.
This doesn't
We're chosen for a different reason, that's for sure.
what in the world, like, and that type of energy. and,
Yeah.
and, and I
Yeah.
love that. And also you see it even in the leadership, where even these
Hmm.
folk, I would say probably in their own point of view at certain points in their lives are like, the system of the system of domestication that we were raised in was wrong, that's why we're going out on a limb here. And their love for their children, their love for these spiritual souls that they feel that they're responsible for. But sometimes at the same time, they can forget, and all kids feel this way. It's like,
Yep.
that you're right. Deep down that you're right. But that being truthful is going to be an offense, and that it's going to be a problem. And like, yeah, but just because you cook worms in here still doesn't mean that it's not Rajistic. Like, I thought the principle was that we want to maintain a sattvic mindset, and that, like, yeah, food is medicine. So if we're eating what we consider to be poison, how is that going to be helpful? That would just be little Quentin. And then
Yeah.
but then it's like, but like going back to that analogy, like, now we know that it's like, okay, I'll put it this way. What's so cool about the way that your school was run was that it really truly gave you freedom to learn all you can learn in the direction that you wanted to learn them. But it also lost, due to the cultural pressure. I feel like it kind of lost sight of the fact of, like, in order for you to get there, what have you all gone through? And like the example I'm going to use is kind of interesting. Like, the rumor has it, Swami Satchidananda way back when might have smoked, right?
Not rumor, he did.
He did,
He did.
right. And then you
Yeah.
take, you know, one of the Swamis I really like. I don't know if I'm gonna say her name, but you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Mentioned, like, when she was in college, she smoked a few times, and all those people probably did mushrooms and all these kind of things. And then
Yeah.
so to come here and then be like, well, we feel that complete abstinence from all these things is the way to go. When if you actually look at people's lives, like, they've done certain substances that has certainly had a role on their development to become the spiritual beings that they are today.
Yeah.
And another reason why I love yoga is that, like, the sutras even explicitly say that. They're like, oh, you can attain samadhi and certain suddhis through these certain things. And I feel like to be reverent of them and to be like, okay, wait, this was sort of like a taste of this thing that meditation brings. This is a taste of this thing that opens up the door for these potential things. And I feel like when you have this perfectionism thought belief system on top of all your actions, like, even if you do a drug when you're 19, 20, 21, your the people that taught you did them, and but then it's to get, you know what I mean, and then but as soon as you get to that place yourself, you're like, you were so pure in a way that like it just kind of like completely scrambled all your systems and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like based off of what you said, like the realism, like I started drinking at 15, and I had no, like, me personally, I had no problems with drinking. Like I drank a lot, and then my body was like, stop drinking, and I couldn't drink. I didn't drink my senior year of high school. I drank at 15, so that was like my sophomore, junior year, like yeah, sophomore year into my junior year, I drank, and then all of a sudden my body was like, without my, against my will, if you will, it just happened. It was like, you're done drinking. You're not going to drink. And then I didn't drink again until I was 21. So just the idea that like, if these substances are even introduced to people, that it'll automatically ruin their lives, I think is a fallacy. And I think,
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah,
know,
yeah. I mean, my
so,
sister and I had such different experiences. Like, my sister's 10 years younger than me.
wow.
And things were really strict when I was growing up. They got less strict by the time that she was a teenager
Mm,
because I started realizing, like, hey, maybe this experiment isn't working so well.
mm,
Um, so, she did a lot of stuff that I didn't do when she was really young. She experimented with some drugs and drank and stuff like that. By the time she got to be like 20, she was over it.
yeah, yeah, it's like,
Right? Like, she was
literally, I'm
totally
like, is
done.
this
Whereas
getting
I didn't
drunk?
even start until I was like 21
Yeah.
because I also was raised, like, my mindset was very rule abiding. And so when
Mm,
I was in the school, I took those vows very seriously. And I said, okay, I signed the paper. Nobody made me sign it. I chose to sign it and go to school here. And so then I'm going to follow all these rules very strictly.
mm.
So also I was like, okay, I think I drank one time before I was 21. That was it. One time when I was like 17 or something, I got so sick. I was like, that's awful.
This is
Why would anybody
terrible.
do that?
Yeah, yeah.
And then when I was 21, then I started drinking, and, so it was interesting because Shane and I had such different experiences 10 years apart, right,
Mm,
of when we were starting to do them. But I think for me, it took me a little bit longer to get through them because I didn't even start the journey until I was, you know, kind of an adult or grownish. I don't think you're really
uh,
an adult at 21, but
yeah, definitely not. Not even close.
yeah. So I think again, that's why I call it an experiment, because I think it was an amazing experiment.
Yeah.
And I think that there were certain things about it that were just absolutely mind-blowingly successful, and certain things where stuff just kind of went like sideways and haywire in there. And this is my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I think that Swami Satchidananda's intention and the way that he envisioned it was absolutely 100% spot on.
Yeah.
I think when the rest of the people got involved and they started trying to interpret what he meant,
Mm.
it went really haywire. Because again, it was all of a sudden all of these humans, and not that he wasn't human, but all of these just regular
Minds
people
and egos.
trying to take these teachings and apply them based on how they were raised, what they knew, how they grew up. And so like we
Ooh.
have like in integral yoga, we have really strange overtones of Catholicism
Mm.
that clearly are not from Swami Satchidananda. He wasn't a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
But all of these rituals and things that we developed were heavily influenced by these early, like, or we have like some Jewish rituals, like Jewish-esque rituals,
Mm.
because there were so many of that generation that was Catholic or Jewish,
Yeah.
that they sort of superimposed what was familiar to them on top of, what Swami
Example?
Satchidananda was teaching. And then we also have some really strange, like one of the guys who was doing the early translations of the chants
Mm.
was very Christian. He was not Catholic, but he was maybe had a background in, Baptist or Pentecostal. I don't know. But he was, so he was doing the translations of the chants. And when we were doing our translations and sort of making them lyrical so that they would, match the Sanskrit,
Cadence, yeah.
cadence,
Rhythm. Yeah.
he put some like kind of strange Christian interpretations into them, which
Mm.
always crack me up because like sometimes when I'm singing the English translation of the chant, I'm totally like, oh yeah, I know who did this one.
Oh wow. Wow. Like, yeah, that was him.
I'm like, yep, that showed through really strong. So there was all this influence. And again, I think the whole thing of having these Western ashrams was really experimental and still is really experimental.
100%.
But you really did not have that many Western ashrams back then. Like, there was a group of kids out in Ananda out in California, they had a school, I think. Then you had the Kundalini yogis, but they sent their kids to India to be schooled. And then you had some of the kids that were raised maybe in the Vrindavan ashrams in West Virginia. I don't even think like Rajneesh, I don't even think they did like a school in his ashrams. So you didn't, there's a very, very, very tiny group of us when you think about the planet who were raised in these Western ashrams. And you're absolutely right. We do have a lot in common. When years and years later, I ran into some of the kids that I had met when I was young, who were part of Yogi Bhajan's ashram and Kundalini. And yeah, it was like seeing your cousins again. Because you just have this like similar thing of like, we were raised in like this really, really weird way that just doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, except for these small couple of groups of kids that were raised in these Western ashrams. So it's really unique, but also like, how crazy is it that I had 12 years of yoga schooling? 12 years, day in, day out. We're not talking about like doing a 200-hour teacher training or a 500-hour yoga therapy. 12 years of day in, day out.
And both your parents too, like and all your friends and all my
friends, all my parents, our entire world. That's all it was just yoga. And pretty much that's kind of how it's been for most of my life is I maintain such close connections with the organization overall, worked in many capacities. But let me go back so we can kind of get through my story.
Let's start with like early adult life.
So when I'm in high school, I decided that I want to be an actor. I was doing a lot of plays and really enjoying that. So I was doing some auditions, and I auditioned at the Southeastern Theater Conference. And the people from the American Musical and Dramatic Academy saw me while I was there. And they reached out and immediately said, "We want you to come to AMDA in New York." I also got, full scholarships to many other colleges, but I really wanted to go to a studio program. I didn't want to go to a 4-year school. So I turn 18, graduate from my Raja Yoga teacher training. So I'm 18 years old. I'm a Hatha yoga teacher. I'm a Raja yoga teacher. I graduate from high school, turn 18, and I moved to New York City to go to acting school in New York City.
When's your birthday?
June 28th.
June 28th. It's coming up.
So, needless to say, that was like the culture shock of all culture shocks. One of the things that Swami Satchidananda said was like, okay, he told my parents that's fine. She can go to school, but she has to call me every single week and check in. I want her to call and check in. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So while I was in school, remember there was one payphone down in the basement of the school, and I'd go down to the basement once a week and call collect. Because, of course, I didn't have any money. So Swami Satchidananda collect. You would collect call from
it sounds like a prison call.
Luckily, he always accepted.
Wow. And he was available? Like, was it like at a certain time of day, or how'd that go?
I remember I used to call him in the evenings a lot. So we had like certain hours you could call him. So I had like this certain, time period in which I could call him.
Gotcha.
And I remember, all the adults around me, because obviously I was a little connected with the Integral Yoga Institute in New York at that point too.
Oh, yeah.
And all the adults around me were like so jealous and like weird because I got to talk to Swami Satchidananda all the time. But for me, like, he was just like my grandfather. Like he raised us more than like, I saw him more than my own blood grandfather.
Yeah.
So for me, he was just like a grandfather figure. It would be like if your grandfather said you had to call him once a week and check in. And so, so I went to acting school. I made about 6 months and then like just burnt out. Like, New York City, you take a little yoga girl in an ashram and then you just dump her in New York City in acting school.
Yeah, that's as cutthroat as it gets. That's like as cutthroat as it gets if people aren't familiar.
Oh my God, it was
Yeah.
so insane. Interestingly enough, this is just an aside. One of my teachers there, Randolph Pearson, who was one of my favorite teachers because he actually had us doing yoga in class, which was unheard of. Like nobody was doing yoga
Wow.
then.
Wow.
And he was having us practice yoga. And so it was so exciting for me because I felt like I was seen by him. Like he could appreciate like
Yeah.
my experience and that like yoga was my life.
Exactly.
Well, years and years later, now we go back to about, 3.5 years ago, I start as the executive director of Integral Yoga New York. And I'm looking through the teacher list one day and I see his name. And he was one of the teachers at Integral
No
Yoga.
way.
And so I
No
got to
way.
reconnect with this teacher from like 30 years ago. And it was such a
Wow.
special, like still such a special relationship and was like one of the greatest blessings of that experience was getting back to go back and experience this teacher. So anyway, so I move back home for about a year, and then I'm like, you know what? New York kicked my ass. I don't like that. I'm going to go back and move back up to New York and show myself that I can do this because,
Yeah.
again, remember, we don't fail.
Yeah. We just try again.
We don't
Yeah.
fail. We just try again. So I went back up and I did it again. And this time I moved into the Integral Yoga Institute on 13th Street.
Mm.
They had three swamis there, looking out for me,
Yeah.
helping me. Swami Divyananda was amazing to this day. She is just like one of my biggest champions and one of my dearest Swami mommies.
Mm.
Um,
That's
and
awesome.
so, yeah, so I got to be in New York City then and really kind of learned to be in New York. And Swami Satchidananda at that point was like, told the person in charge that it was like, you have to clear out one of the rooms. Radha has to live at the Institute this time. So I was up there and my friend Mohini came up and stayed the summer with me. She and I went to school together and we got into all kinds of mischief.
Yeah. Yeah. In New York for
So
the
now you've
first
got two
time.
20-year-olds, right?
Yeah.
19, 20-year-olds who are living in New York City in Greenwich Village. We had a
Mm.
really good friend who lived right across the street. And we would just go out and like go to clubs and go dancing. And one of the things about living in the Institute is you had to go to morning meditation. It was like 5 o'clock meditation. So we'd be out all night. I mean, we probably stunk of like cigarettes and alcohol. I don't even know. And we would stumble in and we'd show up just in time for meditation. And we'd go into meditation and we'd sit there and probably take a nap. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to be able to take our check mark and do our quota, which of
Yep.
course for the other ashramites was probably pretty annoying. But actually,
Big
many of the people that I met then at that time, those relationships have stayed with me through my whole life. Like they were really, I I just created like this group of aunties and uncles who really helped me become like a grown human.
Yeah.
But it was a strange experience because I went from like, okay, all of my like childhood, teenage experiences in this protected ashram environment. And then when I become an adult, I'm learning how to be an adult in New York City, which was such a strange, like,
Opposite.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. So let's like we should probably put a picture in here. I got a picture that I took when I was at the ashram, like of the lotus from the Nataraj, like up on the hill.
yeah.
And yeah, so you can see this compared to compared to New York City is nothing the same.
Yeah. So I stayed up there for about a year, and then after that, I moved back to Virginia, and then I'm still doing theater, and still acting. Um, and then another really significant thing happens for me at this point. So, at that time in Charlottesville, Dave Matthews Band was just starting to take off, and
Mm,
again, I said the bassist and I went to school together in Virginia.
mm,
So I was going and I was spending a lot of time with them, and we were hanging out, and I was there the night that they signed their record contract, their first record contract.
oh,
We were all
wow,
at the club together.
that's awesome.
So we were spending all this time with them, and we would go out to eat and like be out and about. And um, two things happened. One, I was doing a play, and my image was being used for the poster, and so my image was plastered all over town. And the
Mm,
play had really gotten a lot of like critical acclaim, and all these people were really excited about it. So everybody was coming to see the play.
mm,
And so I was starting to get like a little bit recognized around town.
yeah.
Like I'd be in the grocery store and somebody would say like, "Oh my gosh, you were in the Country Wife. Wow. Oh, it's so
Mm,
great." And then concurrently, Dave Matthews Band was really taking off. And theirs was like amplified, right? Like every time we'd be out like eating dinner or something like that, all these fans would be stopping
Yeah.
by and they'd want autographs. And I just was like, something just really like locked into place. And I went, I don't want this.
Mm.
I love acting. I love what I'm doing here, but I do not want to be famous. There's no part of me that wants to be famous. I am too private of a person to want to have to share myself publicly with people like that.
Hmm.
So here I had like this huge crisis. I mean, I was like on this track to be a professional actor. And, you know, if you're at the pinnacle of your field, you're going to be recognizable, right? That's part of how you reach the pinnacle of, you know, if you're
Yeah,
getting the best jobs and you're the
totally.
best at what you're doing. And I just had this disconnect and I was like, whoa, I don't want to do this anymore, which was huge because I'd been pretty much wanting to be an actor from the time I was 10.
Hmm.
So now I'm like, okay, well, now what do I do with my life? So I started working for the book distribution center in Yogaville, which then led me to go work for a publishing company, Hampton Roads Publishing, which it's interesting you bring up all these Toltec teachings because
Yeah.
one of the people I worked for was actually um, they published a lot of the Toltec writings. So they
Okay.
actually published Conversations with God as well and had brokered one of the most profitable deals for a book in like the history of publishing up until that point.
Wow.
So
Mm.
Hampton Roads was like this really big alternative publishing company.
Mm.
And I got to work in the marketing department, which was really fun. I learned so much. I wrote back cover copy. Some of those back cover copy, I think, for Conversations with God 2 and 3 were written by me.
That's awesome.
Um, and so I kind of got this different exposure, was like, okay, I can do other things. And then
Mm.
I left that job and I think I was just kind of like exploring life. And I realized that I really like working as an assistant because I get bored really easily.
Mm.
So I'm going to work. I can easily like kind of max out on my interest. And I realize that when I work as an assistant, there's always something interesting because people have their assistants doing all kinds of
Yeah.
strange things all
Yeah.
the time. So that was my first sort of experience of working like in an assistant capacity. And I started just sort of doing some assistant work here and there.
Mm.
Um, and then I was working as a nanny for a little while, for like a year, for these two Russian kids. It was like, that was such a, I mean, I still am really close to the little girl. Little
Mm.
girl, she's not a little girl anymore,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I'm really close to her still. Um, and my sister, my little sister, who I said is 10 years younger than me, she decided she wanted to go to FIT
Mm.
in New York City. And of course, I was like, well, I'm not doing anything significant, and there's no way I'm letting my little sister move to New York City by herself like I did.
Yeah.
So I'll move to New York City with my sister because I really don't have anything going on anyway. So I move up to New York again,
What is your sister's name?
Purna,
Porno. Okay.
and now I'm like 29 at this point,
Yeah.
28, 29. And
Mm.
so my sister starts going to FIT, and I'm kind of trying to figure out what I want to do. And so I start working for a temp company. And I am working at all these really kind of cool places. I go somewhere for like a week or so, and I'm sort of trying to figure out like what I want my career to be. And, you know, I'm going to work at like Swatch or MTV or, you know,
Yeah.
a advertising company or something like that. And I go and like work there for a week or two. And then, um, so the one thing I said is, please don't send me down to Wall Street. I don't want to work in a finance company.
Hmm.
So sure enough, one day they're like, Radha, we have a really difficult client down on Wall Street, and we need you to go down there and answer phones for them. And I was like, really? Please, I just said it.
Really?
And my boss was like, I really need you to do this as a personal
Yeah.
favor to me. Would you
Yeah.
please
Yeah.
just do it? They're
You're
an
not getting out
important
of that.
client for us, and I just need you to do it. And I said, okay, fine, I'll go do it. It was like the most miserable week of my life. It was so weird. I was like answering phones, but like nobody in the office spoke to me. I was just like, this is so weird. I don't know what I'm doing down here. This is not fun. This is not creative. This is not who I am or who I thought I was.
Yeah.
So at the end of the week, I'm like calling them, being like, don't send me back here. Don't send me back here. And then Friday night, one of the physicists, so it ends up it's a hedge fund that I'm
Yeah.
down there working for. And one of the physicists at the end of the day reaches out to me and says, "Hey, we're gonna go get drinks tonight. Do you want to come with us?" And I was like, "Heck yeah! I got to
Yeah,
see like
please.
who these people are out of this office because I
Yeah.
don't know what's happening in this place." So I go out with them on Friday night, and it ends up they're like all really, really nice people, and they're really lovely. They were just all physicists and scientists and analysts, and so they're just not the most socially
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
engaged people. So they say, "Okay, can you go back to work on Monday?" Because they still haven't found a replacement. And I go back to work on Monday, and they offer me a job.
Mm.
And I call my parents. I'm like, "I don't know what to do. I really don't want to work down here, but like they are offering me a ridiculous amount of money to answer phones.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
will have like
Hedge fund money. Yeah. Hedge fund phone answering
hedge
money.
fund
Yeah.
money to answer phones. Like this is crazy. Plus, there's all these like benefits and like I mean,
Yeah.
it was just such a nice office to work in.
Mm.
And one of the things was my boss also the owner of the hedge fund, he had wanted to be an actor, so he said, "Look, if you ever want to go on an audition," because I guess at this point I thought maybe I'd go back to acting again.
Mm.
He said, "If you ever want to go on an audition, anything like that, I'll let you off work and you can go."
Mm.
I was like, how do I say no to this? Like this could
Yeah.
be
This is
great for me and my sister, right? I can take care of my sister while she's in school. So I say yes. And
mm.
so I end up working for this hedge fund for like 2 years, and it was
Wow.
really changed like the whole trajectory of my life in many, many, many ways.
Mm.
Not the least of which being, up until that point, I had no sense of business. I didn't know about money.
Mm.
The first day I go in there, I'm like trying to send an email to my boss, and Goldman Sachs calls, and I send him an email. It's like, Goldman Sachs calls. He's like, Goldman Sachs? They thought I was so funny because I had no idea what I was talking about. So they started to educate me, and they started teaching
Mm.
me about investments and bonds and stocks and all this stuff, and really helping me understand money.
Yeah.
Plus, now we're talking 2000. Working for a hedge fund in 2000 was like,
Yeah. That's probably
I mean,
crazy.
it was the best.
Yeah. No.
Like
Like.
there was no end. I mean, they were just like brokers, just like throwing money at the company, and they took us out every night. We'd go out to big fancy like dinners, and we'd go to clubs, and there was car service, and like just, I mean, I was just having so much fun working
Yeah.
for this company.
Yeah.
And then, lo and behold, September 11th happens.
Mm.
And this is something that, up until just even a couple years ago, I really did not talk about at all. Like people knew that I was there, but still, it's not something that's very comfortable for me to talk about, to be
Mm.
perfectly honest.
Mm.
Uh, I do touch on it a little bit more now, but
Yeah.
basically, I was working at 140 Broadway. Those of you who are familiar with New York, that's where the big red cube is. And I was like 1 block away from the World Trade Center when the first building fell. So I kept working there for about a year afterwards. And by the time I was done, I had severe, severe, severe PTSD. And of course, nobody really knew. It was such a huge monumental event that even the therapist did not know how to process through this because everybody was so traumatized. So
Mm.
their answer was to just start giving people drugs. And so
Mm.
I didn't know what to do, so I just started taking Xanax. And by the time I left there, I had such a bad Xanax addiction. I was just like doped up on Xanax like 24 hours a day.
Mm.
And I'll touch on this story a little bit, but I'm going to kind of gloss over it for now.
Yeah.
Uh, but basically, I end up coming back to Virginia after a year. They were still finding body parts on the building next to us. Like, I mean, it was just that for a whole year was just completely hellish for me.
Yeah.
We realize now that there are people who are predispositioned for getting more severe PTSD than others, which is why some people ended up with really horrible PTSD. Some people didn't. Some of it has to do with mental health stuff already.
Mm.
Like if you're already prone to anxiety, depression, if you are on the spectrum, there's things that can make you predisposed. But I was like a perfect storm of all the things, apparently.
Mm.
So I come back to Virginia and I'm struggling with this. I moved back to Yogaville. Um, and 10 days, I think, after I moved back to Yogaville, Swami Satchidananda passes away.
Mm.
So now I'm
Yeah.
dealing with this huge thing of September 11th, the passing of Swami Satchidananda. And that year, this was like 2002, and I just start spiraling. I mean, I thought I was doing okay.
Yeah.
From the day to day, you think you're handling things, but really, I was not. I was not okay. And the spiral just keeps going, 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 going until 2005. I am just such a hot mess. They've got me on 10 different medications because I don't know what to do. Like,
Yeah.
my yogic practices are working, but they're not working in the way that and I wasn't applying them, honestly. I was not applying them the way they should have been applied.
Mm.
Um,
And you're being promised these pills are going to, you're being also promised that this medication is going to help. It's like there's also that other side where it's like, this will help with this will help with that. So,
yeah, and this is a lot of mass trauma for the United States, right?
yeah.
This is a huge mass trauma that in the time of pharmacology,
Yep.
right? So we'd had mass traumas perhaps, but they were not in the times of pharmacology. Well, this is in the times of pharmacology. So what do? We just give people drugs. So by the time 2005 comes around, I'm suicidal. I'm like, I can't take it anymore. I just cannot hang out here. Um, and by that time I was meditating more. And I remember saying to a friend of mine, I said, when I'm in meditation, I'm fine. I know I'm not the body. I know I'm not the mind. I can feel the eternal peace. But the minute I have to get up off of that mat and I have to engage my brain is so sick. It's
Mm.
so disturbed that I can't function. And it is driving me crazy. And I really just remember thinking, I just want to go to sleep. I just need a nap. I need a break from this brain. So over that summer, I ended up attempting suicide multiple times.
Mm.
One time was severe enough to end up in the hospital. Just so happened I managed to overdose on pills and took this perfect cocktail of these two pills that canceled each other out perfectly, so that
Wow.
it ended up with no damage whatsoever. Because a
Wow.
lot of people after that would end up with horrible damage. Um, and so after this stint in the hospital, um, they were like, we may have to put you in a long-term facility, but there's one last thing we want to try before we do that. So, but you can't do it while you're in the hospital. We have to release you from the hospital so you can go into DBT. And DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy that is based, interestingly enough, in mindfulness and Zen Buddhism.
Mm.
So I say, okay, well, I mean,
It's pretty close.
what's the worst that's going to happen? I guess
Yeah.
I'll try it. Like, I mean, if I make it, I make it. If I don't make it, oh well. I mean, not everybody survives illness, and this may just be one that I don't survive. But when they get me into DBT, all of a sudden, the mindfulness practices, the teachings were hidden in the therapy. And it ignited something in me where all of a sudden I remembered. It was like waking up and being like, oh yeah,
Mm.
I've got these skills. I know what this is. And so, needless to say, like I was excelling at DBT because the the way that we would break down our thoughts, the way that we would mind map, the way that we'd use the mindfulness techniques, it was all so familiar and things I'd been taught since I was a kid, but I just needed it in a different mind like frame and a different wording in a different context. Because when I was doing it in my traditional yogic language that I had been raised in, it wasn't landing anymore.
Yeah.
But when I looked at it from this different viewpoint, all of a sudden I could see all of the teachings I was raised with, and I was able to start applying them. And so, really, that was sort of the beginning of my healing and coming back around to my yogic roots. And
Mm.
really, what saved my life was going back to these yogic practices and using them in really, really practical ways. Like, all of a sudden, this, like, let's go teach an hour and a half yoga class on a mat in a studio no longer interested in me as much as, like, we are in an emergency. I'm having an anxiety attack. How do I apply these breathing practices in a really practical way? Or I am out at dinner and I am so anxious right now or stressed. I'm experiencing a lot of social anxiety. How do I use this to I would go have bathroom breaks and I would literally like do a little stress management yoga sequence in the bathroom.
Right.
Whereas I used to maybe smoke a cigarette or something like that, I would
Exactly.
go in and like do like these little yoga moments. I think bathroom yoga is one of my favorite things ever because everybody can go to the bathroom, right? Like you always have an excuse, like I gotta go to the bathroom right now, and you can get out of any situation and just go like have a yoga moment in the bathroom, and nobody has to know what you're doing or why you've excused yourself. So
Absolutely.
I started doing a lot of bathroom yoga, and then uh, I was kind of looking at my life, saying, what do I want to do with my life? Well, everything that I've done up until now. I thought I was going to be working as a CEO of some sort of huge company. I was definitely at that time moving up in that direction. Um, and then I was working as like executive assistants and things like that. Very high pressured work that was just not going to be possible anymore.
Right.
And so they had a program. At this point, they qualified me for disability. And then they had a program where you could go back to school. And so I went back and I got my degree in cosmetology.
Hmm.
And I started working in salons and spas. Pretty limited again. I was very sensitive to the chemicals, so it was very limiting of what I could or could not, the environments I could or couldn't work in. But it was such a relaxing environment and such a healing environment. And so my whole life just suddenly changed to like healing, natural methods of doing stuff. I learned to formulate natural skincare products and organic skincare products because I wanted to make sure that everything I was using was safe for me, safe for the environment.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of what I was doing for quite a while. And then in 2000, I guess, let's see, uh, maybe 2018, my husband came up with this idea. He wanted to open a coffee shop.
And when did you get married?
Sorry. I got married in we got married in 2013, I think. We got together in 2011. And so then we got
Gotcha.
married in 2014 maybe.
Gotcha.
Yes, I have the best
Cool.
husband ever. He's
He's so cool.
he's so cool. He's amazing.
Yeah.
And he definitely has kept me very stable, really supported me with my mental health, anxiety, things like that.
He's very grounding for
He's
sure.
so grounding. This guy is
Yeah.
like, and I can take him anywhere and introduce him to anyone, and people are just like, that is such a great guy.
Yeah.
Like, he's legit, like, such a cool dude.
Mm.
He has this weird ability to be like really masculine and really soft at the same time.
Yeah.
He's a
100%.
football player and he's such a dude, like, he's such a
Yeah.
guy's guy. But at the same time, he has this softness about him that just makes him
Yeah.
really appealing to so many people.
There's like a smooth, like a smoothness. Yeah. He's cool to handle. Yeah. He's not. Yeah. I like him.
He's so
Hmm.
great. So yeah, so then he wanted to open up this coffee shop. So we tried to open up this coffee shop, which we opened like 3 months before COVID hit.
Mm.
And then we struggled for about a year with that. And then after a year, we were just so burnt out. Like, this is exhausting. And then we stumbled upon transformational leadership, which was also really significant for me because transformational leadership, again, took the yogic teachings and used them like different language for them and gave me a different perspective again
Yeah.
on what I was raised in and what yoga is. And getting that sort of leadership training is really important. Like, I feel it's kind of like being parents, right? Just because you have a baby doesn't mean you know how to be a great parent. And it's the same with leading. Like, just because you're in charge doesn't mean you have any skill at what you're doing. Whereas actually training yourself in leadership can be really powerful um, to create an environment where you are raising up other leaders, where you are taking feedback as neutral. So everything's just like, okay, it's just neutral. I just got to take the feedback that's given to me. Um, and so as part of this leadership training, I went into like I was doing my advanced leadership training, and they approached me in New York. The executive director at the time approached me from the Institute in New York and said, we need you to come up here and leave New York. We're going to lose our building.
Hmm.
And after much back and forth, and a lot of coaching on the part of my mentor, I finally agreed to, and Dee was like, okay, let's go do it. So we ended up moving back to New York again. And I was there for about 3.5 years, and then just recently resigned. And now I'm kind of like looking at the next steps for me. Uh, Part of it was like great. It was an incredible experience. Part of it was incredibly stressful. And also being in New York, um, I started developing a lot of uh, health issues again around September 11th. I was lucky enough to get into the World Trade Center Health Organization, so they're sorting through some, but that's why I mentioned my voice at the very beginning. So one day I'll have a perfectly clear voice for this podcast, and the next day it might be totally different and sketchy. We're still trying to figure out like what's going on with my nervous system and my system and why I keep struggling with some health stuff and uh, and reactive airway disease. And again, getting to go back to my training with yoga and see how we can holistically um, work towards healing some of these issues that are going on that's kind of like my next journey, which is interesting. Like, I just feel like with yoga, it's always a new journey. You're
Yeah.
always going to find, no matter what the challenge is in life, you can dig deeper and look at yoga from a different perspective and find answers. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now is just, again, I was starting to have a lot of health issues and also starting to have a lot of anxiety again, which was interesting. My nervous system, the pressure of that job was really starting to just get to me. It was an incredibly intense role and involved a lot of pressure. And so my nervous system was really starting to kind of crack at the seams again. And so now it's kind of like an opportunity for me to again look at the yogic teachings and how I can use them once again to create a holistic healing environment. So
Wow.
that's kind of the big, I know that was, you think over an hour, that was not very a fast overview of my life,
I was
but
asking questions
I've
too,
had a
so
pretty big life, and I suspect I will continue to have a pretty big life, but definitely there have been challenges. Oh, I forgot one of the most important things was that then before I went to New York, I got a service dog for the first time. And the service animal has been the difference between, I mean, I couldn't have gone to New York without the service animal. Like the service dogs are amazing. I wish that every single veteran could have a service dog. I wish every single person who's struggling with trauma or PTSD could have a service dog. They're just really such a life changer. And if you guys ever have any questions, or maybe we'll even do some entire episodes around service animals because they're even watching the way that they're present, even watching like just the way that Henson stretches, like the yogic practices he chooses to practice, teaches me a lot about just some basic maintenance of my own body and how I can mimic things that Henson does that can really improve. He has this also pranayamic breathing that he does. He does like a rapid diaphragmatic breathing, like a Kapalabhati, that's just
yeah.
fascinating to me. I learned so much about yoga just from watching Henson and being there with Henson every day. So, yeah, so that's kind of my
Wow.
story.
Um, I wanted to like I wanted to define something that we use the word Swami many, many times. So, what is a Swami, real quick, just so that what is it to you, really? I think that's more important because I think it's going to be different to every single person, but someone that's grown up with them around in your life. Um, and also, how does it compare, say, to a priest or a deacon or an imam, or like how can we understand that relationship?
So I would say, as opposed to what it means to me, it's actually, I would say more how is it defined in integral yoga?
Cool.
Because again, remember, I was not schooled in, I mean, yes, I was familiar with other traditions of yoga, but my 12 years of schooling was integral yoga. That was
Yeah.
integral yoga as taught by Swami Satchidananda. That is what my yogic upbringing is.
Yeah.
Of course, when I study other yoga, it's all the same. So it's not like I can't speak to other things, but specifically my culture, my upbringing is an integral yoga. So, a Swami for us, first of all, we come from a traditional lineage from Master Shivananda in Rishikesh, and that is the Saraswati order. And so, Master Shivananda initiated Swami Satchidananda, and then Swami Satchidananda initiated his swamis into monkhood. And they actually take very similar vows to Catholic priests. There's four vows that they traditionally take, which is obedience, uh, oh God, poverty, maybe. Obviously, I'm not a Swami, so I can't give you that. Anyway, they take they take very specific vows.
Uh,
Once upon a time, I probably could rattle those off, but no, now I cannot. Um, and so the Swamis can be male or female. We have both. Some orders will not allow women to be Swamis, but we do. And they basically live like a monastic life. So their whole thing is service. Service is one of their biggest vows that they take, is serving humanity, serving others. Um, and we have, I think, about 20 or 25 in our order now. Um, and they live mostly at Yogaville, but some of them run the different centers. So we have, Integral Yoga has Yogavilles, its international headquarters. Then we have an institute in New York, an institute in San Francisco. There's an institute in Coimbatore and a small institute in New Jersey. And then we have centers all around the world. But generally, Swamis have run the institutes. Now Coimbatore and New Jersey are run by other people, but
I just did a quick Google. So celibacy, nonviolence, truthfulness, and non-attachment.
yeah, I don't think that's actually what ours are.
Yeah, yours might be different, right?
Ours are different, but yeah, those are some of the ones that you would traditionally have for
Gotcha.
Swamis. Yeah, and
Cool.
some of the Swamis, I mean, again, each Swami order can have different vows.
Mm,
It's really up to them. There are plenty of Swamis in India that do not necessarily even take poverty or celibacy
yeah.
as their vows, but those are ones that we integrate into ours.
Huh.
So
Cool.
yeah, so you hear about Swamis a lot. They're a big part of. We also have a ordination and ministry ordination. So we have reverends as well. So both my parents are reverends of integral yoga. So they've been ministers since 1977, 78. And they have similar vows that they take. One of the things I think that's really key also to integral yoga is they do believe that, there's no drugs, smoking,
Yeah.
alcohol consumption. If you're going to have any kind of leadership, whether you're a Swami, a minister, or in a position of leadership, those are pretty serious vows that they ask that you take in order to be in that role. So, for the 3.5 years that I was executive director in New York, I didn't drink alcohol. Um, I don't smoke anymore, um, but alcohol, particularly, I never drink alcohol. Now I will because I'm like, I don't.
Yeah. YOLO. Yeah, I mean, I think
Well, I won't. I really don't care. Sometimes it's fun, so I do. But like, I've always taken that role. Again, it's something I chose. Nobody made me sign up for the role. So I feel like if I'm going to choose it, then I should have respect for what I'm choosing. And so I've always been very kind of abiding by those principles. There are other principles like nonviolence and speaking kindly and things like that that I think they could take a little bit more seriously. Um, I think like yelling at people probably should be held right at the same level of whether you drank alcohol or not, but that's not always the interpretation that they use, and that's been actually one of my big criticisms of the organization overall, is that we should take all of them seriously. Like no one's forcing you, right? You can either choose to do them or not choose to do them. But if someone is going to go and scream and yell at somebody, or someone's going to go out and drink a glass of wine, they should be treated equally. Whereas we tend to see, like, if somebody goes out and drinks a glass of wine, then they're in violation of their vow or something. But if somebody screams and yells and acts horribly to another person, we don't take that at the same level.
as
Which to me is
always.
like,
Yeah, as always. I mean, I really like that. approach to looking at the world, because it's like the same thing with swamis is a lot of people, especially if you're not Christian or if you're in a particular faith and you're seeing swamis like just how they act and how they are, and you're using that sort of like as a litmus test for everything else that's like related to that entire thing, where it's like whether we like it or not, like the swami or the monk that you get associated with represents that entire practice, like, and until you get exposed to others. So I do see, like, yeah, really what's even more important is like, what you're saying is like that behavioral thing, because um
Which
yeah,
is so interesting because, like, we really like to put people on pedestals. I think just as a society, like, we do it to famous people, we do it to religious figures, we do it to all kinds of people. And I guess what's really different for me is I find that to be far less interesting
hmm
when I'm looking at people and their accomplishments. Like, I find Martin Luther King Jr. to be far more interesting when I look at how human he was than if
100%.
I just try to put him on a pedestal and say he was a perfect
Yeah,
person. Right? When I see his human failings, which are not necessarily failings, but when I see his humanity, and I feel the same way about Swami Satchidananda, and honestly, I feel the same way about the Swamis who run this
yeah,
integral yoga organization. When they allow themselves to be human, I find them to be far more effective, much better teachers,
100%.
far more relatable than when they're trying to be perfect or appear to be perfect. And I think that, it's to me, humanity, like when you can be a human and be amazing and still like fight for people's rights, do the right thing, like create incredible organizations, like lead people, inspire people, that to me is far cooler than if I think that
Yeah.
you're some sort of like being that is so unlike me that I couldn't even relate to or touch.
Being a goody two shoes is not cool.
It's
It has
just not,
never been.
it's just not possible. I mean, really, like we all have issues. Like we
Even
all have stuff.
presenting it, even like presenting yourself
Yeah.
as a goody is not compelling. You can't be a leader that way. You can't make influential change. And I think especially like fellas, like what locker room talk or whatever the phrase is like
Yeah.
your quarterback or whoever, this person you look up to, like if they can't get down in the mud and play with you a little bit, you're like, oh, okay, like there's something going. No, don't allow me to be evil, but that's different than like playing around a little bit. There are things about life that is almost like that also unite us, and I think that interplay of like we human beings are all of the things, and but we're connected to each other through all of the things, and all we're trying to do is figure out like the highest expression of whatever the thing is that we're into.
I
And
think
like
that's why
life.
I wanted this episode to be first, right? I wanted us to have this conversation first, Quentin, because I felt like people will find, I think, the next conversations more interesting if they see that Radha and Quentin are just human beings.
Oh yeah.
We're not pretending to be anything. I'm not an expert at anything. All I'm saying is I spent a long time in this school and I got some knowledge put in my brain because of it. And I can share my life experiences. I've been through a lot in life. You have been through a lot in life.
Yeah.
We found tools that helped us get through these really challenging experiences. And so we're just here to share that. We are not pretending like we're some perfectly wonderful,
100%.
perfect yogis. I don't even know what a perfect yogi is, honestly. I mean, I don't even really refer to myself as a yogi because um, I didn't even choose this.
Yeah.
It was just how I was raised, and so it's just like what I had. It's not like I went out and like said, you know, it's actually it gives me kind of a weird perspective sometimes when I'm in yogic communities because so many yogic communities are made up of seekers, people who chose to be there.
Mm.
I didn't choose this. Like I just was born into it. Now I have chosen it again throughout periods of my life, right? I
Yeah.
chose to stay here. I chose to remain involved. I chose different things. But I do have a little different perspective sometimes. And I think that's what came up a lot when I was running integral yoga, that I just have a different perspective because I'm not, um, I don't even know if I don't know, would I go choose to honestly live in an ashram if I hadn't been raised in one? I really ask myself that question a lot. Would I choose to be, I don't even know if I choose to be involved in yoga. I don't know. Like, given my background or who I am, like, I'm really involved. I really like business. I really like numbers. I like spreadsheets. I like, I'm also really creative. Like, but I don't know. When I mean, I did go back and do stress management teacher training, but most of the yoga teaching I did was through school. So,
Mm.
like I said, by the time I was 18, I was already a yoga teacher and a Raja yoga teacher. Um, and those were things that I taught off and on throughout my life. But I don't know, would I have made the effort of learning on my own? I always question that for myself, and of course, there's no answer because I am who I am. I cannot be
So
anything other than what I am.
I feel like I feel like that's a perfect segue into like kind of like the last two things we could talk about. This sense of dharmas for dharma, and how we met. Um, so I can tell the story a little bit. So
Please do.
from my point of view, like now that you've heard Radha's whole spiel, there's so many interesting synchronicities between our lives. My mom's from New York, grew up there. Um, I bet you a lot of that New York mentality entered your like ashram plus in the South plus in the rural South mindset, and I feel like that was essentially my entire life dichotomy where it's like you're balancing my dad who grew up in Hampton and grew up essentially on a farm really, and like had a ton of brothers and had a slow life, and even when he lived in the city he had a slow pace of doing things, and I got to see like my mom's like eyes wide open, always look. My mom's mom said this. This is a great like window. My mom's mom raised my mom to look at anything that moves. She said,
Mm,
if anyone around you moves, look at them and assess the threat,
wow.
essentially. So like that is the energy that we were raised with, right? Assess the
Yes.
threat from every direction. Always have and especially like the uncles, and especially from places that my cousins lived in New York, for example. They're like, you can't just walk around. You have to have your head on the swivel. You need to be looking up and down and around just to make sure no one's messing with you. You can't wear all red. You can't wear all blue. You can't wear certain colors. You can't do
Hmm.
this. You can't, you know. So that kind of energy was very prevalent. So but anyways, so when I was a kid, I hated New York. Like I would go, we went all the time because my family was there, but I hated it. But I have a cousin now who's a year younger than me, and and we also had which also makes it a little special because we had another cousin who was Jewish who died in a car accident when I was 19, and he was,
Yeah.
um, was I 19? I don't know. It was early, and he was young. He was a couple years younger than me. So this is like the only other male cousin that I have that's like around our age and stuff. So I went to go visit him in New York and see his girl. And while I was there, I was like, I have to catch a class. I've got to catch a yoga class. And those of you who've been in my class, you know, I usually carry around a Light on Yoga book by BKS Iyengar, and I usually kind of use that as a play in the class. And so Iyengar and Integral Yoga share a spot. So I was like, oh, this is like a dream come true. This is crazy.
Hmm.
And on top of that, there was I don't even, it might have been free. I don't know if it might have been free. I would have paid whatever for it, but I want to say it was a free
I think it
class.
might have. I actually don't remember
I don't
either, but
remember. I don't remember,
we
but
had
it was super affordable. It wasn't like
yeah.
$35, $30. Like, because I was like, I'm in New York, and these are the two most, one of the two of the top 10 at least, the most prominent lineages in the states, and especially for us yoga instructors. Yoga Alliance makes all of us read Light on Yoga and the Swami Satchidananda's interpretation of the Yoga Sutras. So I'm like, this is super cool. And they had a Bob Marley themed class.
We had a
And
bummer. But that was really cool. The Marley brothers, when they were promoting their dad's movie, a movie about their dad, they didn't want to just promote in traditional spaces. They specifically asked them to promote it in spiritual and wellness spaces. And so they reached out to us directly, their representatives, and said, would you be willing to do this Bob Marley themed class at Integral Yoga? And they gave us like all this swag and stuff and like
yeah,
posters to put up. And so even though it wasn't traditionally something we may have done previously, I was like, heck yeah, this sounds like so much fun. So yeah, so we did this Bob Marley themed class, which was really, it ended up being really, really cool and really
absolutely.
beautiful.
So beautiful. And it was very coincident, very stars were aligning because I was only there in town because it was my cousin's birthday, I think. Like there's a cousin that's 1 year older younger than me, and then his older brother's like 5 or 6, 7 years older than me, and it was his birthday, I think. And also at the same time, my cousin's girlfriend at the time, she was like 8, 9 months pregnant, right? So I was like, it was like crazy everything all at once. So um, I go to the class, and it was outstanding. It was so beautiful, and I'm I actually don't even think I knew ahead of time that Integral Yoga was there. I'm trying to think because when I got there, it was
Mm,
taught by Integral Yoga,
yeah.
but I remember I don't remember. But either way, so I get there and I'm just kind of like just lingering around downstairs in the bookstore. Like my thought process was like, okay, I'm not going to be here much longer. I want to make sure I soak all this in, right?
Mm.
And as I'm there, I'm really into Big Molly too. You'll find this about me. Like my spot, like not to brag, but my Spotify rap says I was in the 0.05 percentile of Bob Marley listeners in the last year, right? So like Bob Marley and the Wailers. So it's like it's not a joke and it's not a drill. Like, and I listen
No.
to many. I listen to music a lot, very very often. So this is really a dream come true, and I'm sitting there kind of like chilling in the lobby.
Legend has, by the way, Legend has been like a an album in my family
Yes,
since like the 80s. Like my family, that's always their like go-to default album. So when they were talking about Bob Marley, I was like, oh my God, yeah, we're in. Like,
so easy, so easy.
I mean, he's such a prophet,
Really,
such a prophet. And like
quite
what he
good.
did, talk about amazing humans. Like I just,
Inhuman. You know, he all of his children aren't by the same woman.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And so we're talking about the human and a chain smoker. You know what I mean? For lack of better
Hmm.
words, he smoked herb all the time, and
Yep.
but he smoked spliffs too. There was tobacco in there, so it wasn't like it was just strictly herb. And so I look at it as like all of these things contribute to that beauty, and like you talked about earlier, like his whole humanity, like, and I think that was
Yep.
one of the things we bonded on when we first started talking in person. But anyway, so I'm lingering in the space, and then Radha, actually, your dog walks in first.
Always Henson
Yeah,
always
Henson was
enters a
first,
room before
and I
me.
was like, "There's a
People know
dog
Rada's
here."
coming because Henson comes.
And that already had me sliced because I missed my dog, and I was like, "There's a dog in here! Like this is so great." And then since I'm a dog person, always sparks like a little bit of petting and or trying to pet, but service dogs you're not supposed to pet,
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. And then we get to chatting, and you might remember different details, but what stood out to me about our conversation was like just I think I like went to shake your hand and then I kind of held your hand with both of my hands, like you shake your hand and I held your hand like this, and you're like something in you just like clicked like in your eyes, and I've seen this before in certain other scenarios, so I was like,
Mhm.
okay, I know I've seen this before, this look. And what was on my heart and mind before I went up to New York was I was like, I really want to go to Yogaville, but basically I have two dogs and we couldn't really afford it, right? Couldn't afford the room and board, plus like the dogs couldn't really come, so I was like, I'm gonna have to find an Airbnb and do all this kind of stuff. And then we had a conversation, and you were like, "Hey, why don't you and your wife and your dogs come stay at our place? Why don't and still make it to the retreat?" And what was even more beautiful
My
about that,
family afterwards was like, "Wait a minute, who's coming to stay at your house?" I was like, "I don't know. I just met this guy in the bookshop." I was like, "It just has a really good vibe. I don't know. Like, this is just one of
yeah,
my people. I can tell you already."
that's how it felt. It felt,
Yeah.
and it's funny because I had already noticed Yogaville on the map, and I'm a big Virginia person. Like I'm the opposite type of person. Like I feel like Virginia's the best place, and for many reasons, but yeah, mainly because I lived there and I loved it, and I've even when I'm in Colorado now, and like Denver's super dope. I've been to LA, New York, like I said, Seattle. I've been to Miami and all of the major cities really in the states, and it's like still nothing is like this place quite right. And so to me, Yogaville being in Virginia was like divine providence. And um, I've got a relative that was locked up in Buckingham. So Buckingham is near Yogaville, and there was also like for a period of time there are some classes being taught at Buckingham, and I know there was still a yoga program there till still to
Hmm.
this day. So like that also meant a lot to me. And I love like I went to Virginia Tech, so I spent a lot of time down there. So, anyways, so when you like offered that, I was like, oh, this is like a great opportunity. And I forgot how many weeks after it was. It wasn't many, but
It was about
soon
11
after that,
afterwards. Yeah.
yeah, soon after that was the retreat, and like that was really when we got to actually have a conversation. Was at the same time that my family was staying at your place, and one of our we were listening to Bob Marley in the car. I'm trying to think of the song, but whatever song we were playing, as soon as we came in, you were also playing it already on your record player, and I was like, ooh, and it's a record player, which is like that icing on the, that's perfect. So I was like, wow, this is great. And then we started talking, and then you were reading the book on Rita Marley and sort of her point of view and
Yeah.
how she, it's not like she didn't want to be, she wanted to be famous. Interestingly, like how you don't want to be famous, but she did want to be famous,
Mhm.
and talking about just sort of the, just her point of view and her realistic point of view of what it's like to
Yep.
be buried to this human being and having this human being's child who also is seen as a prophet, right?
Yep.
And I thought that was super dope, and just like your candidness and all that stuff. And I think ever since then, especially that conversation, we talked a little bit about what happened with the attempted suicide and those types of things.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, this is a person I could really get down with. Where I like to have kind-hearted but also a little bit vulgar conversations, or at least conversations that push the envelope a little bit and have fun.
Yeah.
And you were someone that I could do that with, even though we have all these like seemingly differences. It was like that soul spirit was the same, you know what I mean? And I think we were just like two kids that were born into a place that had an enormous privilege.
Yeah.
Like growing up, like you grew up in Yogaville in America, Yogaville, or like growing up in the ashram community, but just like I think just most Americans can relate. Like we're just told that we're the chosen ones. We live in a nation under God. We won the Cold War because God's got our back. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of that energy and what it means to be
Yeah.
American. And
America is
rap,
the greatest country on earth. We're so
absolutely,
fortunate to be
yeah,
born
the
here.
best,
Everybody wants to be American. Like that's all the stuff that's taught to us from the time we're
yeah.
born.
He's born. So,
Yeah.
even though you might have had it in an acute sense of being a chosen one, I think all of us kind of had that a little, that were raised here and like went through the system of domestication here. You become 19, you're thinking to yourself, I have, not only is this like presently the best place, it's also the best place ever in history. I have it better than all my ancestors in this
Yeah.
place. And we all met reality and was like completely disillusioned and realized all these things. And like so that's why so many of us, like me, got drawn into yoga. It was sort of the opposite reason. Was I could see how these teachings had different point of views from the Christian teachings, but they were close
Yeah.
enough that it resonated. And um, so anyway, so I like the Bob Marley, like that spirit of Bob Marley. I feel like it wasn't a coincidence that was part of it. And when I think of like what his music represents, it represents that like that for lack of a better word, godliness isn't what we're talking about,
Mhm.
pretending to be perfect in goody two shoes and just kind of like putting on this mask. It's like no, it's like starting where you are and being the best you can be, and just like starting with what you know and doing the best expression of that. Trying to, and what that really means is living in as an accordance with your conscious as you can, and as in tune with alignment with you can. And like what ends up happening when you're in that state is you're happy, you're light. And you can double check them in both ways. So music brought Yogaville to existence, right? Alice Coltrane, like you're saying, these different people.
Yeah.
And satsang. I mean, even the Bhagavad says that, right? Krishna says over and over and over and over and over and over and over again that like
Mhm.
satsang, like this generation, it's singing, it's the yeah, it's that like it's that musical energy, that levity, that coordinative energy. We're dancing, we're living a physical life, but this physicality isn't meant to harm each other. It's meant to play and grow with each other. And um I just feel like that's the reason why we got brought together is like we can talk about we can talk about the real things that happen in society in a way that is that is actually healing, is actually beneficial and authentic to ourselves. And like all we want to do really display here is like our authentic selves, because we're just trying to show you that like this image of perfectionism that's been placed on us, whether it's through the yogic system, whether it's through the government, whether it's through your own like culture and the patriarchy or the monarch or the matriarchy in your own culture, however you want to look at it, like but what really connects us is our authenticity, that little kid in us that knows like deep down right from wrong. And if we're able to
Yeah.
like live in accordance with that as often as possible, then um like you start to realize that like you meet random people like Radha, and all of a sudden these people are offering you like more than what you could ever ask for. And living in that like space, um, I would say takes a lot of faith, and it takes a lot of like um it demands a certain amount of like restraint on your part to like kind of like live authentically, right? Because you're in a society and in a system that doesn't necessarily always support that. And even in an ashram, even being raised in an ashram, you still can't avoid that internal system of people trying to place their will upon you rather than allowing
Yeah.
God's will to shine through you and express itself. And why dogs are so beautiful is that dogs have no impediment like that. And
No,
that's
they're
why
just living in the flow.
they're just living in the
You
flow.
feed them, they eat it.
Yeah.
You give them
You feed
pets,
them.
they love it. They're
Yeah.
like totally in the flow. Whereas we have all these things of like, I didn't deserve that. Or,
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of the things that I really loved about you was when I made the offer, you said yes. Someone else would have been like, no, that's too much. Or, oh, that would
Mm.
be weird. Or why would I, you know, but you were just like, you were totally willing to just accept what the universe was giving to you in that moment. And that was really powerful that you were just like, I'm going to say yes to this opportunity.
Mm.
And saying yes to that opportunity, was what allowed us to flow forward. And I'm always looking for yes people in my life. Like,
Yeah.
because my husband and I live in yes opportunities so much.
Mm.
So much of our life is just like flow, flow, flow. The people we hang out with, the people we attract
Yeah.
to ourselves, the circles that we survive in, like everything is about flow. And so to meet other people that are willing to flow with you is so key. And then, of course, meeting Safa too and realizing she is
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
such an incredibly wise, like just
A
powerful,
powerhouse.
but
Mm.
like poor Safa was having these like migraines at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember she just had this horrible migraine, but the way that she showed up and her presence, even in the midst of like this pain and this thing that was going on with her, just made such a huge impact on us. And we were just so impressed by who you two people were
Mm.
and how you showed up in the world and how you interacted with us and just again flowed with the whole thing. We were just like, yeah, we like these are our people. You're just meeting people.
Likewise.
You're like, these are our people. These are the kind of people that we want to surround ourselves with and like be in relationship with. Um, and so then you were like, I was doing a lot of PR at the time for the Institute,
Mhm.
and I was on all these podcasts. And if you want to check out some of the other podcasts I've done, you can go to my website. But you were like, I kind of want to promote you to like these different podcasts because I think there's a lot of stuff we could be talking about
Yeah.
around yoga. And you were like, I would like to promote you on these other podcasts. And it was interesting because at the same time, like a lot of stuff was happening in New York,
Yeah.
and I think my time there was kind of winding down. And so the timing just kept being weird. And then I just remember waking up one morning and having this like light bulb go off that was like, no, no, you're supposed to do a podcast with Quentin. That's the
Mm.
key. And
Mm.
then being like, why would I take this on? Like I have so much work. Why am I going to take on a podcast? And then it just kept over and over and over again. So I think it was actually probably about 2 weeks before I told you. And
Mm.
then when I finally said, Quentin, I think we're looking at this the wrong way. I think we're supposed to have a podcast. You were like, yeah, I'm totally down with that. I was feeling the same thing too. And I was like,
It's so
after
true.
2 weeks, I do have a little resistance in me when God calls me to something, the universe calls me to something. I'm not the first one to be like, okay, yay. One thing you'll find about me is I'm quite resistant. And I
Mm.
will be like, are you sure? Are you
Yeah.
really sure you want me to do that? Are you really, 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 really sure I have to do that?
Send me another
And then
song. Send me another one,
eventually
please.
I'm like, okay, fine. I get it. I'll do it. But I was so glad when I mentioned it to you that you were like, yeah, I totally see that vision
Yeah.
because the conversations we were having were so fascinating. And I think that your curious mind and the way you look at the world. And then again, my vast knowledge that I don't even know is in my brain. Because again, it's not something I really it's not something I did to get this knowledge. It was just something like a gift that was given to me to just put all this yoga knowledge into my brain from the time I was, born basically. That I realized like, and when I was doing these other podcasts, I just realized there's a lot of knowledge in there. And you would ask these questions and I'd be like, oh, yoga has an answer for that.
Yep.
And then I'd like share, my perspective. And again, it's not my perspective of like what I would do or what I think. I just would be like, oh, yeah, Swami Satchidananda used to talk about that, or we have an answer for that. And so that's why we kind of thought like doing this one answer yoga would be cool, like asking all these questions. And again, I mean, I think our conversations are pretty interesting. So I hope other people find value in them too. But I think you and I are very unique in the fact that we'll talk about anything.
Yeah.
Nothing is off limits for us.
100%.
And we
100%.
really feel like life is just, we're all lifing all the time. And there's nothing that you can't talk about or you shouldn't talk about. And there's nothing that doesn't relate to yoga to me. Like yoga is the most practical life skills, life science, life everything.
Mm.
So why not just apply it in the real world? Like it doesn't have to be something that monks do in a cave off in India or even monks do at an ashram.
Mm.
Yoga is something that is accessible to all of us every single day. And your questions always even have me thinking about it and being like, oh, that's interesting. What did yoga say about that? What did Swami Satchidananda say about that certain
So
thing?
let's play with one now. I've got an idea, and I want to see if like we can like if you've got any other additional advice. So, um, as you guys will see when this comes out, we kind of filmed the second episode, and then we filmed this latter part. And something that kind of happened since the last time that we filmed the last episode is sort of like a military escalation between Iran and Israel. And I I know I feel it. I know a lot of other people feel it.
Yeah.
Um, and especially if you pay attention to like any astrology or anything like that, like the last time any of the planets were like this was during the Civil War. And um and as I'm thinking to myself like, okay, what are the tools that we have that are the most productive to generate peace? There is often times protests that are I feel like protests are put on a pedestal as a tool to generate peace. But if you've ever seen a protest or been in a protest, even a peaceful protest, it's a warlike thing. It's a when you're there, when you're physically there or around there, your heart rate goes up,
Hmm.
right? And you start chanting right from the base of your voice, and we will not. And you start to yeah, it's like a Elysian, you know what I mean? Only thing is missing are arms, and other than arms, like,
Yeah.
and um so, but I do understand that energy, and that energy of wanting to do your part to be peaceful, to institute real change. And we'll get into this a whole bunch, about all the different ways, like essentially how yoga is essentially about peace of mind. Essentially, it's about the science of it and how to bring yourself back to that state, and with all the challenges that life will throw at you, and what can you do consistently to maintain peacefulness in mind. And we'll get into more detail about that, but um, it's that taking some time to sit down, whether it's 5 minutes, two
Hmm.
minutes, 1 minute. Maybe you meditate already, so maybe it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe it's 45 minutes. But if you do feel like you want to do something that will prevent a further escalation between all of the great nations, um, Iran, China, like all these different places that what I'm going to do personally is I'm going to spend at least 5 minutes each day thinking non-violently. So my personal mantra that I really love is just inhaling non-violence, exhaling violence, right? Or releasing it all from my system, or just inhaling non-violence or peace or something like that. And I'll be doing it. I just so happen to live very close to the capital in Denver, so I'll be able to do it there. But if there's any
Hmm.
place that is of any sort of significance to you, I would advise that. Even if it's not seated meditation, maybe you can't sit that long, but maybe you could lay down. And if we're able to just use that space in a more and actually be peaceful ourselves, that'll send a much stronger message, I feel, um, with our community than um, sort of staying the course, right? I've
Yeah.
lived an entire life of wars and protests against the wars,
Yeah.
or and it's not um, an effective means because it would be less by now. So,
Yeah.
um, although marching and standing together is a beautiful thing, and there's a time and a place for that, every day can be you can spend your own time every day. And if you are a devoted person, if you like to pray, then pray specifically for that, for peace between all of us. And even and always know that, like, we can never know all the intricacies, right? We don't know what all of our president's advisors are thinking, what all the different advisors are with the governors, with the rich people, and we have no idea. But we do know that we can at least unplug from that and try to generate a little bubble of mental peace around us. And
I
I know
think
for
like
myself that's been productive in my own personal experience in life. But it does feel like things are getting closer to a head. And what a head means, a head, things got to a head right before World War One and World War Two,
yeah.
or 2002, and that could mean that the
I'm
consequences of
really
that could be exponential. So,
I'm really kind of surprised by even how many people who I perceive as peaceful people who have practiced this for a really long time
mm,
right now are allowing these situations to disturb their peace. And I
mm,
think there's a difference between caring and disturbing your peace.
mm,
So you can have a both and. You can go out and march. Absolutely. If you want to march, go out and march.
yeah,
Like marching is a wonderful action, but not if it's disturbing your peace. So Swami
yeah,
Satchidananda would always say, like, peace is your birthright. Do not disturb it. Nothing that is going to disturb your peace is ever going to do any good in the world. And so, how can we? I see these people like praying for peace, marching for peace,
mm,
doing all these things for peace, but they can't even have a peaceful conversation. Like, the
mm,
minute somebody has a different viewpoint or has, even in families, right? Like,
mm,
the politics right now are so divisive.
mm-hmm,
So it's all of a sudden like, you voted for Trump, you voted for Biden, now we can no longer be friends. And like, if you cannot find peace between people who are one on one supposed to like each other or family members, how are you going to have peace on a big scale? It's just not going to
100%,
happen. So if
100%.
we don't find peace in our day to day life, if we cannot find resolution, if we cannot find compassion and love and all the things with the person who's right in front of us, and that goes for even your relationship with your partner. If you cannot find peace in your relationship with your partner, how are you going to have peace on earth? It's impossible. It's like you're trying to create something on the macrocosm that doesn't exist in the microcosm.
Mm,
So anything you can do on a day-to-day basis to maintain your own peace and to bring peace to yourself and those around you is going to affect the peace on the planet. As a matter of fact, like, they've done really a lot of studies. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and his college is it in Iowa?
mm,
Uh, they did a lot of studies on meditation and what group meditation can do and how it can actually like amplify the
mm,
effects of the piece and what you're creating. And so, yes, meditating in groups can be really powerful. It does tend to amplify the experience. So if you have the opportunity to meditate in a group, please find that group and meditate along with them. If not, I mean, people on the East Coast in integral yoga always meditate at 12 noon. Join us at the same time, and then you're amplifying, and you could be meditating and amplifying that energy. But anything you can do to just be peaceful. And if that means, like, I don't watch the news. Um, I pay attention to the news, but I don't watch the news because I
yeah,
don't find that anything about sitting there and watching the news is improving my peace.
yep,
And I don't think that that is me being like having my head in the sand or ignoring world events. You can't be on the planet right now without knowing what's going on. I mean,
yeah,
you'd have to be hiding in a cave somewhere. But that doesn't mean I have to engage in it and doesn't mean I have to feed into it. And I certainly don't like it when I'm in family situations and people start using vitriolic language or
Hmm.
start calling people names, I'm like, that is not going to promote any peace on the planet. We're not going to get any closer to peace if we can't even find peace with the person who believes just a little bit different than us. How are we going to expect that Ukraine and Russia are going to make peace? How are we going to expect that Israel as an entity and Iran as an entity, Iran, are going to have some sort of peace if we can't find peace just between two human beings, like the person who's sitting right in front of you? So I
Man,
think that, like, for me, again, you can do both. And if you want to go march, marching's awesome. I did so much marching in my 20s. I was
yeah,
really
100%.
into marching. I loved it. Um, I probably would march a little bit now if I was in maybe a little bit better physical space, but uh, my my lung capacity doesn't always allow me to do stuff like that.
Yeah, I think
But I don't
I
have
think
any problem with it, especially if you're young. I think young people, like, that is part of their process, and that's part of their growth, and that's part of what uh, it ignites passion in people, and passion and joy and connectivity and all those things are really important. Like, there's nothing like being at a march and feeling really connected to people. But don't
100%.
mistake that connection with these people as otherism. Like, we want to other everything that's not like us. And all that othering leads to war, it leads to disagreements. And again, Swami Satchidananda said, the biggest thing you can do to create peace on earth is be peaceful in your own self. Because the truth is, when you're around peaceful people, it is really hard to, like, be upset and angry and frustrated. And some people just have peaceful vibes. Like, they just walk into a room and everybody's like, wow, my husband's kind of one of them. Like,
Mhm.
he's got a really chill vibe, you know? And so
Absolutely.
some people are just like that. And so the more you can create yourself to be like that, I think the better off the whole planet's going to be.
Yeah.
Um,
I
hugs,
it,
hugs, uplifting each other, hugging one another is such a powerful thing. Hug
you know,
somebody
it
you have a disagreement with. God, man, if we could do that every day, could you imagine if you could hug somebody who sees differently than you? Like, every single day, find someone to hug, how powerful that would be.
and yeah, finding someone different than you and
Yeah.
loving them is like there's nothing like that. If you're and if you're at and just to be like more on the nose is like dudes that are my age. um I'll say, and ever since 2020 there's been a different culture around it. You talked about Martin Luther King and how my
Mm.
grandfather and they used to protest and what they would tolerate at their spaces. It's not the same anymore. And that's the sad reality is I'm in
Yeah,
Denver and we're destroying Denver, you know,
I know.
over what the president that no one here even voted for. So it's sort of like we're losing that context, but that there's that energy, that Mars energy is there and it's forcing people to do things. And um I would say I'm like there's nothing more difficult than trying to sit still for 20 minutes. It does like it takes so much discipline that it's like that's a good place to put it. And what's extremely popular today is um wearing a mask, wearing goggles, wearing all black so that you can throw things at the riot gear and so that you can engage in violence essentially against our brothers and sisters that they really are brothers and sisters. They're our neighbors, but you call them cops, right? But they're really just people that wearing these clothings for a couple hours each day. And so that othering and that's part of the duty that I feel is like whatever happened to just start with American, not Democrat, not Republican, not conservative, not liberal, not MAGA, not this, not that. Just like if you're at dinner table and you were in an American territory, we can start with that, right? And we can be like, we just want what's best for all of our brothers and sisters, and and I want to say too that the reality too of our life, like for me, my wife was born in Iraq, right? They
Hmm.
fled because of our policies towards Iraq. Um, she has a wife, well, not wife, my wife's grandmother lives in Iran. I've had many friends that are from Iran, even friends like from Virginia Tech and in elementary school that are from Iran that grew up there. I teach people that are from around. One of my best homies right now, one of my favorite students, or like most disciplined students who came to most of my classes, lived in Iran well into adulthood. China, for example, many Chinese friends and folks that I know, and also students that are Chinese, friends that are Russian and Ukrainian. So from our point of view, it's like from our American, or those of us that had a similar domestication system of domestication, like these people are all our neighbors. Like so even even that context of like we can't it's a microcosm. It's like that that beef abroad is immediately going to be brought home because we already live in a multi-ethnic, multicultural place that has a bunch of people from all over the place that we've been in conflict with our state. And at the end of the day, though, what I'm seeing, or what I really wanted to get across, is that like there is, if you're going to protest and you're going to engage in certain activities, understand that like what Rada's saying is like that's a piece of it, but the main piece is your internal peacefulness. So the mental power that you hold is much stronger than any physical power that you think you have. Right? Your
Yeah.
mind can reach anywhere.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We can use this
Yeah.
power of our imagination
Hmm.
to use it for constructive means. And if you're a guy who's more like me, right, a football player, contractor, military person, like I'm not saying you have to imagine rainbows and pearls, but you can just be like, hey, peace should be the default. It shouldn't be like cool. It's like, no, typically we just don't fight. We just don't need to fight. We have no reason to fight. That's not our thing. We don't need to do that. We'd rather grow and do other things. And you can use the power of your imagination when you start to hear narratives about other things and other people. Even in your own thought process, you can be like, that's not true. That's my brother. I just haven't talked to them yet. They just speak Farsi, or they speak Alabamian and I speak New Yorker. And so we have these differences. But if we just sat down and talked for a while, we'd realize we'd have 90% of things in common. And um, I guess my little angle with this is, since I do pay attention to not to the news, but to politics, and mainly the government's actions, and just knowing that the transatlantic slave trade is the thing, and that these things were policies that were implemented by individuals, and
Yeah.
we lived in the blessed time now where, like, in theory, we have influence over those individuals and what they do. So, if for these last several decades we've had a foreign policy that is feeding the feuds between the families, right? Feeding, if we have a political, if we live in a, we live, our system of domestication, if you will, encourages lack of peace between brothers and sisters, especially during COVID. That was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
a clamping down on it.
Yeah.
So if we're going to rebuild back from that, right? If we're going to create like an actual society that we actually want to live in, it should be bottom up. And it should be based on like the reality of what it actually means to be in this place at this time. And I just know from my, I was saying, what I know from my angle is that like it is our state's interest to go to war with these nations. We and they've
But
said
not
it.
necessarily in our humans'
It's
interest.
not in our
It is in
human
the state.
interest.
It's not in the human being's
It's not in
interest.
the human interest, but it's in these guys that want to be five-star generals and win the battle of San Francisco and win the battle of New York. Like
Yeah.
that is a thing that's in us. There's little boys that, like how Rada grew up to wanted to be an actor. There are little boys that want to grow up and be five-star generals,
Yep.
and their imaginations all cumulatively generate this system that drives battle. And if we're able to, as like the real peaceful people that I know we are, that we all really are, that none of us really want to do these things and fight these battles. Like, yeah, well, if someone comes here, yeah, but the way to really do that is like just to cultivate peacefulness within the self. And I think the starting point for a lot of us is like first just being aware of the rate that you breathe. If you're breathing faster or shorter, or like you feel tensity there, that's your first check that you've lost some level of peace of mind. And you don't even
Hmm.
have to change the way that you're thinking. All you have to try to do is just slow the rate at which you're breathing. And
Yeah.
then it'll give you space to create more positive thoughts. And like Rada was saying, and a little bit what I'm saying is that like if if all of your energy to implement change within our society is only in protesting in that energy, that and it doesn't bring you peace of mind, then you are contributing to that force at which you're wishing to fight.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah,
so as
don't contribute. Don't
yeah,
contribute. You don't
don't
have to,
contribute.
I mean, you can be engaged, you can be involved, you can be, but you don't have to contribute to the anger,
Yeah.
the violence. You can, even if you have to fight, like we were saying in the other, episode, which will technically follow this one.
Yeah.
Um, but even if you have to fight, you don't have to lose your peace while you're doing it. And that
100%.
is that is an ancient warrior class mentality, because there have been warrior classes forever.
100%.
And that's an ancient warrior class mentality, that you can maintain your peace and do your dharma and do what you're supposed to be doing, which for some is fighting. So I think the biggest key is just maintaining whatever sort of balance and um, peace that you need to maintain. Again, nothing else, just to make it through your own day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Well, I think that's good.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up for today.
Yeah.
Thank you all for listening to this first episode and for getting to know me and Quentin. And we look forward to carrying on these conversations um, in the future. And again, feel free to leave us a comment. Let us know what you think and what you'd like to see in conversations if you have questions. You also had a good question you were going to ask them. What were you going to ask? Um,
Oh, so if you have any interesting, not even interesting, but just authentic stories of um, whether it's your personal lived experience with war, um, whether that's being a soldier or a civilian in the area, whether you don't even have to be American. If you're listening to this and you're not even from the States and it's somewhere else, please, like, it's the same thing. We just want to
yeah.
have like more authentic, and we do want to like hear those stories, and we can kind of like talk about them and see how that plays into all of this, into the intricacies of actually being a human.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'll have like a little bit of information on my latest and greatest classes in the bio. And other than that, peace and love to everybody.
Peace and love. Thank you, Quentin. Um,
Peace. Mm. Till next time.